I still remember the exact moment my world shattered. It wasn't when I walked in on them, though that memory is seared into my brain like a brand. No, it was the 3 seconds before. That final moment of blissful ignorance when I was still just Mia Calloway, a normal 24-year-old with a steady boyfriend of 4 years and a future that seemed comfortingly predictable. I remember adjusting the strap of the grocery bag cutting into my palm, fumbling for my keys, and thinking about whether Ryan would prefer the spicy or mild salsa I'd bought for our movie night. 3 seconds of normalcy before everything changed. The sound hit me first. A woman's laugh, familiar yet wrong in this context, followed by low murmurs. I hesitated at the door to our apartment, keys dangling from my suddenly numb fingers. Something primitive in my brain already knew, but the rest of me refused to process it. I opened the door quietly, not intentionally, just a coincidence that would forever alter the course of my life. The grocery bag slipped from my grasp as I saw them on our couch. Our couch. The one Ryan and I had spent months saving for, arguing over fabric swatches and comfort levels until we found the perfect one. Ryan, his back to me, naked from the waist down. And beneath him, her long caramel-colored hair spilled across the armrest, her face flushed with pleasure before twisting into shock as she spotted me over his shoulder. My sister Vanessa. Mia. Her voice cracked as she shoved at Ryan's chest. "Oh my God." Ryan whipped around, his expression morphing from confusion to horror in the span of a heartbeat. "Mia, fuck, it's not—" I didn't hear the rest. A strange ringing filled my ears as I stared at them. These two people I loved most in the world, tangled together on the furniture we'd picked out for our future home. The future that was disintegrating before my eyes like tissue paper in rain. I turned and walked out, ignoring their calls. My feet carried me down the 3 flights of stairs and out into the spring evening that continued on with infuriating normalcy. Birds chirped. A neighbor nodded hello. A delivery guy passed me with a pizza, the scent turning my stomach. I made it exactly 2 blocks before I vomited into someone's pristinely manicured hedge. "You okay, miss?" An elderly man walking his corgi peered at me with concern. I straightened up, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. "No," I answered honestly. "I don't think I'll ever be okay again." He looked alarmed, but I was already walking away, my phone buzzing incessantly in my pocket. I turned it off without checking the screen. I knew who it was. I knew what pathetic excuses were waiting. 4 years? 4 fucking years I'd given to Ryan. We'd met in college, me an art history major with dreams of museum curation, him a business student with plans for his father's investment firm. We weren't the most obvious match, but it worked. Or I thought it did. We'd moved in together last year, started tentatively discussing marriage, and all this time, I didn't know how long it had been going on. I didn't want to know, yet my mind tortured me with possibilities. Had it been happening when Ryan and I celebrated our anniversary last month at that boutique hotel downtown? When Vanessa helped me pick out the lingerie I wore that night, offering suggestions with a smile? When the 3 of us had Christmas dinner with our parents, and Ryan complimented Vanessa's new haircut? The memories replayed with new, sickening context. Every interaction, every family gathering, every casual touch between them that I'd dismissed as friendly familiarity. Had I been blind or just willfully ignorant? I found myself at Westlake Park, sitting on a bench as twilight settled over the city. My phone had died hours ago, but I hadn't noticed until I tried to check the time. It didn't matter. Time had become meaningless anyway. "Can I sit?" I looked up to find Lisa, my best friend since high school, standing there with 2 coffee cups and red-rimmed eyes. I didn't question how she found me. This had been our spot since we were teenagers, sneaking cigarettes and sharing secrets. "Ryan called you?" I said flatly. She nodded, handing me a cup. "And Vanessa." About 30 times each. She sat beside me, her shoulder pressing against mine in silent support. "Want to tell me what happened?" "I think you already know." I stared into the coffee, watching the steam curl into the cooling air. "I want to hear your version." So I told her, my voice mechanical as I recited the facts like I was giving a police report rather than describing the implosion of my life. Lisa listened without interrupting, though her knuckles whitened around her cup. "I'll kill them both," she said when I finished, and the simple declaration made me laugh, a harsh, broken sound that startled a nearby pigeon into flight. "Get in line. Where will you go tonight?" Lisa's question brought reality crashing back. I couldn't go home, not to the apartment I shared with Ryan, filled with evidence of our life together. Not to my parents' house, where Vanessa still lived in her old bedroom while saving for grad school. I hadn't thought that far ahead. My place, Lisa said firmly. For as long as you need. That night, curled on Lisa's lumpy pull-out couch, the numbness finally cracked. The sobs came from somewhere deep and primal, tearing through me until I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Lisa held me through it, not offering platitudes or false hope, just steady presence as I shattered completely. Morning brought no relief, just a hollowed-out feeling and eyes so swollen I could barely see. Lisa called in sick for both of us. She to the marketing firm where she worked, me to the small gallery where I was assistant curator. I spent most of the day staring at her living room wall, responding in monosyllables when spoken to. By evening, my phone had been charged, revealing 48 missed calls and a barrage of texts. Ryan begging for a chance to explain. Vanessa's messages growing increasingly desperate, swinging between apologies and justifications. My mother, clearly having heard a sanitized version of events, urging me to talk things through with your sister before this gets out of hand. I deleted them all without reading beyond the previews. You'll have to face them eventually, Lisa said gently, setting a plate of pasta beside me that I had no intention of eating. No, I don't. The strength in my voice surprised us both. I don't owe either of them anything. What about your stuff? Your clothes, your books, your collection? My collection. Years of carefully acquired art pieces, small works by emerging artists I'd discovered through the gallery, each one representing a moment in my journey. They were displayed throughout the apartment, the only real decorative input Ryan had allowed me among his minimalist aesthetic. I'll figure it out, but I didn't have to. The next morning, Lisa's buzzer rang and Ryan's voice crackled through the intercom. Mia, please. I know you're there. I have some of your things. I froze, panic rising in my throat. Lisa looked at me questioningly, and I shook my head violently. She doesn't want to see you, Lisa said into the intercom, her voice cold. I'm not trying to. I just brought her clothes and her art pieces. I'll leave them in the lobby. I'm not coming up. 10 minutes later, after we watched from the window to confirm he'd actually left, Lisa brought up 4 large boxes. My hands trembled as I opened the first one, finding my clothes neatly folded, the ones I'd left at our apartment, not the ones I'd accumulated over 4 years. The second box held my art collection, each piece carefully wrapped in bubble wrap. I unwrapped one, a small watercolor of the Seattle skyline, and found it intact. The care he'd taken made me even angrier somehow, as if this gesture could begin to make up for what he'd done. The third box contained books, jewelry, and miscellaneous personal items. The fourth was smaller, and when I opened it, my breath caught. Photographs of us, separated from their frames. A dried rose from our first date. Concert ticket stubs. The entire archived history of our relationship returned to me like a museum deaccession. Beneath it all was a letter. I recognized Ryan's handwriting immediately, the neat, precise script I'd seen on countless grocery lists and birthday cards. I ripped it to shreds without reading a word. Good for you, Lisa said, helping me gather the confetti-like remains. Fuck his explanation. But that night, alone in the dark of Lisa's living room, doubts crept in. What had the letter said? Had it been an apology? An explanation? Some pathetic attempt to justify sleeping with my sister? The questions circled like vultures, picking at the wounds I was desperate to close. I got up and retrieved my laptop. With shaking fingers, I typed Ryan's name into the search bar, then backspaced it away. Instead, I found myself searching for his father, James Whitaker, founder and CEO of Whitaker Investment Strategies, one of Seattle's most successful boutique financial firms. The man who'd taken an immediate liking to me when Ryan brought me home for the first time, who'd always asked about my career with genuine interest, who'd once told me I reminded him of his late wife. Same spark, same eye for beauty. I'd met James dozens of times over the years. He was everything Ryan aspired to be: successful, respected, sophisticated. Unlike Ryan's mother, who had remarried and moved to Arizona with her new husband, James had remained single since his wife's death from cancer when Ryan was just 15. No one could compare. He'd told me once at a Christmas party, a wistful smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he sipped his whiskey. The firm's website featured a professional photo of him, silver-haired, distinguished in a tailored suit, with the same striking blue eyes as his son, eyes that had always looked at me with warmth and approval. I slammed the laptop shut, disturbed by the direction of my thoughts. But the seed had been planted. 2 days later, I found an overpriced studio apartment that I could just barely afford on my gallery salary. It was tiny, with a kitchenette barely deserving of the name and a view of the brick wall of the adjacent building, but it was available immediately, and it was mine. Lisa helped me move in my meager possessions, the boxes from Ryan constituting the majority of my worldly goods. "It's temporary," she assured me, eyeing the water stain on the ceiling. "Just until you get back on your feet." I nodded, but we both knew there was no timeline for recovering from this kind of betrayal, especially when I still hadn't told her about the idea that had taken root in my mind, growing stronger each sleepless night. A week passed. I returned to work, smiling mechanically when colleagues expressed concern over my flu. I avoided calls from my family, sending terse texts that I was fine but needed space. I ordered takeout I couldn't taste and watched Netflix shows without registering the plots. And I planned. It started as just a fantasy, a way to direct my pain outward into anger instead of letting it consume me from within. But the more I thought about it, the more structured the plan became, the more I needed it to be real. I would seduce James Whittaker, not for sex necessarily, though I didn't rule it out, but to create a connection that would devastate Ryan when he discovered it. To take something from him as he'd taken from me. To make him feel even a fraction of the betrayal that had hollowed me out. It was elegant in its simplicity. James had always been kind to me, had always seemed to enjoy my company. He was handsome for his age, Ryan's looks with the confidence and polish that his son still lacked. And I knew from Ryan that his father had been on exactly 2 dates since his divorce, both arranged by colleagues and both disasters. The first step was reconnecting naturally. I knew James had a standing lunch at Luciano's every Wednesday, an old-school Italian place near his office downtown. Ryan had mentioned it countless times, rolling his eyes at his father's predictable routine. So on Wednesday, dressed in a form-fitting but professional black dress I'd retrieved from Ryan's apartment, I walked into Luciano's at precisely 12:45. I spotted James immediately, alone at his usual corner table, reviewing documents while waiting for his meal. My heart hammered against my ribs as I approached, doubt suddenly flooding my system. What was I doing? This was insane. Vindictive. Beneath me. But then I remembered Ryan's naked back, Vanessa's flushed face, the sound of her laughter seconds before I opened the door. And I kept walking. "James?" I said, injecting surprise into my voice. "I thought that was you." He looked up, confusion giving way to recognition, and then genuine pleasure. "Mia." He stood immediately, ever the gentleman. "What a lovely surprise. Are you here with colleagues?" "Just grabbing a quick lunch between meetings." I lied smoothly. "The gallery is trying to coordinate a new exhibition and it's been non-stop." "Well, you must join me," he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "Unless you're in a hurry?" I hesitated, playing the part. "I wouldn't want to intrude." "Nonsense. I insist." I sat, arranging my features into a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. James studied me for a moment, his expression softening. "I'm glad for the company," he said, signaling for the waiter. "It's been a rather solitary week." I ordered a salad I had no intention of eating and steered the conversation toward safe topics. The latest exhibition at the gallery, a book I knew he'd read, the unusually warm spring we were having. I avoided any mention of Ryan, and James, to his credit, didn't bring him up either. It wasn't until the check arrived that he finally addressed the elephant in the room. "Mia," he said gently, "I hope you don't mind my saying, but you seem different. Is everything all right?" I looked down at my barely touched salad, calculating my response. Too much vulnerability would seem manipulative. Too little would close the door I was trying to open. "I'm adjusting to some changes," I said finally, meeting his gaze. "Ryan and we're no longer together." A flash of surprise crossed his face. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Ryan hasn't mentioned anything." Of course he hadn't. Ryan, who prided himself on his perfect image, wouldn't want his father to know he'd been caught sleeping with his girlfriend's sister. "It's recent," I said, my voice steady despite the renewed anger flaring in my chest. "And I'd rather not get into the details. But it was—" I let my voice trail off, breaking eye contact as if overcome. James reached across the table, briefly covering my hand with his. "You don't need to explain. Breakups are difficult enough without having to relive them for others." The gesture was comforting, paternal, not at all what I was aiming for. I needed to shift the dynamic, to make him see me as something other than his son's ex-girlfriend. "Thank you for understanding." I smiled, subtly turning my hand so that our fingers brushed as he withdrew. It's nice to talk to someone who isn't demanding explanations or taking sides. Are mutual friends making it difficult? Among other complications. I sighed, letting genuine exhaustion color my words. Some situations get messy no matter how cleanly you try to cut ties. He nodded, a shadow passing over his face. I understand that better than most. He seemed about to say more, then checked his watch. I should get back to the office. This was an unexpected pleasure, Mia. I've always enjoyed your company. Likewise. I stood as he paid the bill, waving away my offer to split it. It was nice to have a conversation that didn't involve everything else. As we walked out together, I took a calculated risk. Maybe we could do it again sometime? I miss our discussions about art. Ryan never quite shared your appreciation for it. James looked surprised but pleased. I'd like that. Perhaps you could show me that new exhibition you mentioned? I'd be happy to. I took out my phone. What's your number? I'll text you the details. As we exchanged contact information, something I'd never had reason to do during my relationship with Ryan, I felt the first real sense of purpose since discovering the betrayal. This wasn't just revenge, it was reclaiming control, creating consequences. I'll be in touch, I said, offering my hand to shake. He took it, his grip warm and firm. I look forward to it. I watched him walk away toward the financial district, his tailored suit setting him apart from the younger tech workers flooding the sidewalks. Then I turned and walked in the opposite direction, the beginnings of a smile playing at my lips. Phase 1, complete. I waited 3 days before texting James about the exhibition, long enough not to seem eager, but not so long that our chance meeting would fade from memory. I kept the message casual, professional even, mentioning that the exhibition was opening the following weekend and offering a personal tour if he was interested. His response came within the hour. That sounds wonderful. Saturday afternoon works for me if that suits your schedule. We arranged to meet at the gallery at 2 p.m. I spent the intervening days in careful preparation, not just planning what I would wear or say, but fortifying myself emotionally for the next stage of my plan. I needed to maintain the perfect balance, friendly but with undertones of something more, interested without being obvious, vulnerable without seeming pathetic. I also needed to contend with the persistent messages from Ryan and Vanessa. Both had progressed from apologies to concern to frustration at my continued silence. My mother had called Lisa, worried about my overdramatic reaction to what she'd been told was a one-time mistake. The betrayal, it seemed, extended beyond my boyfriend and sister to include family members willing to minimize my pain for the sake of harmony. The morning of my gallery date with James, I received a particularly pointed text from Ryan. You can't ignore us forever. We need to talk about this like adults. What happened was wrong, but refusing to communicate is childish. The hypocrisy burned. Ryan, who had been anything but adult in his actions, presuming to lecture me on maturity. For a moment, I considered abandoning my plan. Was I sinking to their level by plotting revenge? Was I becoming something I would later regret? But then I remembered how easily they had betrayed me, not in a moment of drunken weakness, but in our home, on a day they knew I'd be out shopping specifically for a night with Ryan. The premeditation, the callousness of it, rekindled my resolve. I dressed carefully for the gallery tour, a sage green silk blouse that brought out the gold flecks in my hazel eyes, paired with a pencil skirt that was professional yet flattering. I kept my makeup minimal but precise, aiming for an effortless elegance that contrasted with the more obvious styling I'd adopted during my years with Ryan. James arrived exactly on time, dressed in casual weekend attire that still managed to look expensive, dark jeans and a light blue button-down that echoed the color of his eyes. Eyes so similar to Ryan's that for a disorienting moment I questioned what I was doing. This is a fascinating space, he said after greeting me, genuinely interested in the converted warehouse that housed our gallery. The industrial elements provide such a striking backdrop for the artwork. That's exactly what I love about it, I replied, leading him toward the main exhibition hall. The contrast between the raw structure and the refined art creates a dialogue about context and perception. Our conversation flowed naturally as I guided him through the exhibition, a collection of works by Pacific Northwest artists exploring themes of isolation and connection. James asked insightful questions, offered thoughtful observations, and listened attentively to my explanations of technique and artistic intent. I found myself genuinely enjoying his company, almost forgetting the ulterior motive that had brought us together. Almost. "This one speaks to me," James said, stopping before a large canvas depicting a solitary figure on a fog-shrouded coastline. There's something about the posture, resigned yet defiant. I studied his profile as he examined the painting. The resemblance to Ryan was there, but so were the differences. The character etched into the lines around his eyes, the confident set of his shoulders that his son mimicked but hadn't earned. The artist calls it aftermath, I said softly. It's about remaining standing after everything familiar has been washed away. James turned to me, his expression thoughtful. Is that how you feel now? After Ryan? The direct question caught me off guard. I hadn't expected him to broach the subject so plainly. Yes, I admitted, deciding honesty would serve me better than artifice in this moment. But there's a certain freedom in it too. When you lose what defined you, you get to choose a new definition. That's a remarkably resilient perspective. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. I remember that feeling after Catherine died. Not immediately, of course, but eventually. The terrifying liberty of having to reconstruct your life. The mention of his late wife created an opening I hadn't anticipated. Ryan told me she was extraordinary, that you two had something special. A shadow passed over James's face, quickly replaced by warm remembrance. We did. She was... He paused, searching for words. Catherine saw the world differently. She taught me to look beyond the obvious, to find beauty in unexpected places. His gaze returned to me. That's what I recognized in you when Ryan first brought you home. That same quality. My heart skipped a beat, not entirely due to my scheming. It was a genuine compliment, and despite everything, it touched me. That's one of the nicest things anyone has ever said to me, I responded truthfully. I'm only stating what's evident. He gestured around the gallery. Your passion for art, your ability to articulate what makes a piece meaningful. These aren't common traits, Mia. We completed the tour, our conversation shifting between art, philosophy, and cautious personal revelations. As we reached the gallery entrance, I took another calculated risk. There's a small cafe around the corner that makes excellent espresso. If you're not in a hurry? James checked his watch, a subtle movement but one I recognized from countless family dinners where he'd been monitoring the time without wanting to appear rude. I'm sorry, I have a conference call with our Tokyo office at 4. He looked genuinely regretful. Another time, perhaps? Of course. I kept my disappointment minimal but visible. I understand completely. What about dinner? He suggested, surprising me. Next Friday? There's a new restaurant in Capitol Hill I've been meaning to try. I allowed a moment of hesitation, as if mentally checking my calendar. Friday would work perfectly. As we said our goodbyes, James leaned in for a brief hug, an unexpected gesture that sent my pulse racing, not with attraction, but with the realization that my plan was working. The boundary between Ryan's father and his ex-girlfriend was already blurring into something less defined. Thank you for today, he said as he pulled away. It's been too long since I've engaged with art this way. I watched him walk to his car, a subtle black Mercedes, practical yet luxurious, much like the man himself. As he drove away, I felt a complex mixture of triumph and unease. The triumph was straightforward. I had successfully engineered a dinner date with James Whittaker, establishing a connection independent of his son. The unease was harder to pinpoint. Was it guilt over manipulating a man who had shown me nothing but kindness? Or was it the realization that I was enjoying his company far more than my revenge plot required? I pushed the questions aside. This wasn't about feelings. It was about justice. About consequences for actions that had destroyed the life I'd built. If I occasionally enjoyed the process, that was incidental, not central to my purpose. The week leading up to our dinner was punctuated by more attempts at contact from Ryan. He showed up at the gallery once, forcing me to hide in the storage room while my colleague Maya intercepted him, claiming I was out at a meeting. Vanessa sent a handwritten letter to Lisa's apartment. It had been forwarded from my old address, which meant Ryan had given it to her. I burned it unopened on my tiny apartment balcony, watching the edges curl and blacken with a satisfaction that scared me a little. By Friday, I was vibrating with nervous energy. I'd selected my outfit carefully, a deep burgundy dress with a neckline that suggested rather than revealed, paired with delicate gold jewelry that emphasized the slender column of my neck. I'd worn my hair down, the way James had once mentioned looked nice at a family dinner years ago, a casual comment I'd filed away and now deployed strategically. The restaurant was upscale but not ostentatious, with a Pacific Northwest-inspired menu and an extensive wine list. James was already seated when I arrived, standing immediately as the host led me to the table. "You look lovely," he said, his appreciation evident but respectful. "That color suits you." "Thank you." I smiled, accepting the compliment without deflection as I might have in the past. "This place is beautiful. Have you been here before?" "First time." A colleague recommended it. He waited for me to be seated before retaking his own chair, an old-world courtesy that Ryan had initially mimicked but eventually abandoned as our relationship progressed. The evening unfolded with surprising ease. We discussed books, architecture, travel, carefully avoiding any direct mention of Ryan while dancing around the shared knowledge of him. James ordered an excellent bottle of Pinot Noir that complemented our meals perfectly, and I noticed him watching with approval as I assessed the wine knowledgeably before accepting it. "You have a discerning palate," he remarked. "Most people your age haven't developed that appreciation yet." "I had a good teacher," I replied, purposely ambiguous about who that teacher might have been. In truth, it had been my father, a wine enthusiast who had educated me on vintages and regions since I was old enough to legally taste. James leaned back slightly, studying me over the rim of his glass. "I find myself curious about something, Mia. Why reach out to me after your breakup with Ryan? Most people in your position would avoid family connections." The direct question caught me off guard, though I should have anticipated it. James hadn't built a successful investment firm without learning to identify motivations and patterns. I set down my glass, considering my response carefully. Too much truth would reveal my hand, too little would ring false to his perceptive ears. "Honestly?" I met his gaze steadily. "You're the only Whitaker I ever felt truly understood me." Ryan and I connected in many ways, but he never fully grasped my passion for art, for beauty, for seeing beneath the surface. I paused, allowing vulnerability to show. When things ended between us, I realized the person I'd miss having conversations with most was you. It wasn't entirely a lie. James had always shown more interest in my career and artistic perspectives than Ryan, who had tolerated rather than shared my enthusiasms. The realization that this truth could serve my purpose made it all the more powerful. A complex expression crossed James's face, pleased but cautious. "That's quite a compliment." He seemed about to say more, then redirected. "Have you spoken to Ryan at all since the breakup?" The question was casual, but I sensed its importance. Was he gauging whether reconciliation was possible? Or trying to determine if his son knew about our dinner? "No," I said simply. "Some betrayals can't be talked away." "Betrayal?" His eyebrows rose slightly. I assumed it was a mutual decision to part ways. I hadn't planned to reveal the truth so soon, but the opening was too perfect to ignore. I looked down at my plate, letting silence build for a calculated moment. "I walked in on him with someone else," I said finally, my voice quiet but steady. "In our apartment? On our couch?" I forced a small, bitter laugh. Not exactly the sort of thing that leads to productive conversation. James's expression hardened, disappointment and anger flashing across his features. "I'm sorry, Mia. I had no idea." He shook his head. "That's inexcusable. It's not your responsibility," I assured him, reaching across the table to briefly touch his hand, our first intentional contact of the evening. "You didn't raise him to behave that way." "Nevertheless." He turned his hand to clasp mine briefly before we both withdrew. "You deserved better." The rest of the dinner passed in a slightly more subdued atmosphere, though James made an effort to return to our earlier conversational ease. When the check came, he waved away my offer to split it. "Please allow me. It's been a genuine pleasure." Outside the restaurant, the spring evening had turned cool, and I suppressed a shiver. Immediately, James removed his jacket and draped it over my shoulders, another gesture Ryan would have considered unnecessarily formal. "Thank you," I said, pulling it closer around me, inhaling the subtle scent of his cologne. "For dinner, for the conversation, for not judging me." "Judge you?" He looked puzzled. "For what?" "For still wanting to be connected to you despite what happened with Ryan. For not making a cleaner break." James's eyes softened. "Life is rarely clean, Mia. Relationships overlap and evolve. I've enjoyed your company far too much to think you should disappear from my life simply because things didn't work out with my son." We stood there on the sidewalk, the moment stretching between us with new possibility. I watched his expression carefully, looking for signs that he was seeing me differently, not as his son's former girlfriend, but as a woman in her own right. "Would you like me to drive you home?" he offered. I shook my head. "I think I'll walk for a bit, clear my head. It's not far. Then I'll say goodnight." He hesitated, then leaned in to kiss my cheek. a chaste gesture but lingering just a fraction longer than strictly proper. "I hope we can do this again." "I'd like that," I replied softly. I watched him walk to the valet stand, waited until his car pulled away before turning toward my apartment. The weight of his jacket around my shoulders felt like both protection and possibility. Phase 2 was complete. James now knew about Ryan's betrayal, saw me as someone independent from his son, and had expressed clear interest in maintaining our connection. The foundation was laid. Now I needed to build upon it. The next morning, I texted James to thank him for dinner, mentioning that I still had his jacket and offering to drop it off at his office. His response came quickly, "No rush. Perhaps you can return it next time we meet?" "I enjoyed last night immensely." I smiled at the message, the familiar rush of vindication flowing through me. But as I set my phone down, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror across from my bed. There was something in my eyes I didn't recognize, a hardness that hadn't been there before. For a moment, I wondered if this revenge was changing me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "Mom's birthday dinner is next weekend. She wants you there. Please don't make this harder than it already is." The audacity of it, the assumption that I was the one making things hard, by my absence rather than Vanessa making things impossible by her betrayal, rekindled my resolve. This wasn't just about hurting Ryan anymore. It was about reclaiming my power from everyone who had conspired to diminish my pain for their convenience. I ignored Vanessa's message and instead focused on advancing my plan with James. I needed to create more opportunities for contact, to build a relationship that would be undeniable when Ryan eventually discovered it. The opportunity came in the form of a charity auction being hosted by the gallery the following week, a black tie event featuring works donated by local artists to benefit arts education programs. As assistant curator, I was expected to attend and help manage the event. I sent James a formal invitation, adding a personal note. "The gallery would be honored to have your support, and I would be delighted to see you there." His RSVP came the same day. He would attend. The night of the auction, I was a bundle of nerves beneath my professional demeanor. I wore a floor-length midnight blue gown that revealed just enough skin to be noticeable without being inappropriate for a work function. My hair was swept up in an elegant twist, emphasizing the diamond drop earrings borrowed from Lisa. The only truly fine jewelry I owned had been gifts from Ryan, and I'd pawned those weeks ago to help pay for my new apartment. The gallery looked magical, transformed by strategic lighting and floral arrangements into a space both sophisticated and welcoming. As guests began to arrive, I circulated professionally, explaining the works available for auction and the cause they would support. All the while, I kept one eye on the entrance, waiting for James. He arrived 40 minutes into the event, distinguished in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. I watched as he surveyed the room, nodding to a few acquaintances before his eyes found mine. The smile that crossed his face sent a curious flutter through my stomach. Triumph mixed with something warmer I chose not to examine too closely. I made my way to him, conscious of the eyes that followed my movement across the room. "Mr. Whitaker." I greeted him formally, mindful of the professional setting. "Thank you for supporting our event." "The pleasure is mine, Ms. "Calloway?" He responded in kind, though his eyes conveyed our shared understanding of the artifice. "This is quite an impressive gathering. Let me show you the pieces available for auction," I offered, guiding him through the exhibition with professional courtesy that barely concealed the more personal connection we'd established. As we moved through the gallery, I was acutely aware of his presence beside me, the subtle scent of his cologne, the occasional brush of his arm against mine as we paused before each artwork. I introduced him to colleagues and artists, noting with satisfaction how he referred to me with a familiar warmth that suggested our connection extended beyond this evening. During a moment when we were relatively isolated, examining a sculpture in a quiet corner of the gallery, he lowered his voice. "You look stunning tonight, Mia. That color is magnificent on you." "Thank you," I replied, allowing a hint of pleasure to color my response. "It's not often I have an excuse to dress formally. We should remedy that." His eyes held mine, the suggestion clear. Before I could respond, a voice behind us interrupted. "Dad? What are you doing here?" I froze, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. I hadn't considered this possibility, that Ryan might attend the auction. He had never shown interest in gallery events before, had always begged off with work commitments or simple disinterest. Yet here he was, impeccable in a dark suit, his expression shifting from surprise to confusion as he registered my presence beside his father. "Ryan," James's voice cooled noticeably. "I was invited by the gallery to support their fundraising efforts." He didn't elaborate on who specifically had extended that invitation. Ryan's eyes moved between us, confusion giving way to dawning suspicion. "I see," his gaze fixed on me. "Mia, you look, well, thank you," I replied, my voice impressively steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "If you'll excuse me, I should check on the auction preparations." I moved to step away, but James placed a light hand on my arm. "I'll find you later about that piece we discussed," he said meaningfully. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak further, and walked away with measured steps, resisting the urge to look back. I could feel Ryan's eyes boring into me as I retreated, his mind undoubtedly racing to make sense of what he'd just witnessed. I ducked into the small office behind the main exhibition space, pressing my back against the door as I struggled to regain my composure. This confrontation wasn't part of my plan. Not yet. Not when things with James were still developing. But perhaps it was better this way. The seed had been planted in Ryan's mind. Now it would grow with his imagination doing much of the work. When I emerged 15 minutes later, I saw Ryan and James in what appeared to be a tense conversation near the bar. Their postures were rigid, their expressions controlled but cold. As I watched, Ryan gesticulated sharply before stalking away, disappearing into the crowd while James remained in place, his jaw set in a way I recognized from previous family disagreements. I approached him cautiously. "Everything okay?" James took a measured sip of his scotch before answering. "Ryan seems to think I'm crossing some sort of line by being here tonight." His voice was calm but with an undercurrent of anger. "Apparently I'm violating some unwritten rule by maintaining a connection with you." "I'm sorry," I said automatically. "I didn't mean to create problems between you." "You didn't?" His tone was firm. "Ryan created this situation, not you." He set his empty glass on a passing server's tray. I made it clear that as an adult, I choose my own associates without requiring his approval. The words sent a thrill of vindication through me. This was exactly what I had hoped for, James taking my side, establishing his relationship with me as independent from and possibly in opposition to Ryan. "Still," I said, playing the role of the considerate ex-girlfriend, "I understand it must be uncomfortable for him to see us together. Perhaps it should be." James's expression hardened momentarily before softening as he looked at me. "Let's not allow Ryan's issues to overshadow the evening. This is your event, and it deserves our full attention." The rest of the auction proceeded without further incident, though I was constantly aware of Ryan's presence as he circulated through the crowd, carefully maintaining distance from both James and me. When the bidding began, I noticed James participating actively, eventually winning a small abstract painting by an artist I'd once mentioned admiring. As the event wound down and guests began to depart, James approached me with his auction receipt. "Would you arrange to have this delivered? I'd like to ensure it's properly handled." "Of course." I accepted the paperwork, our fingers brushing in a contact that seemed deliberate on both sides. "Congratulations on acquiring it. The artist will be thrilled it's going to an appreciative home." "I have the perfect place for it," he said, his gaze steady on mine. "Though I may need some expert advice on positioning. Perhaps you could help with that?" The invitation was clear. "I'd be happy to," I replied, aware of Ryan watching us from across the room, his expression darkening as he observed our interaction. James left shortly after, but not before kissing my cheek in farewell, a gesture just public enough to be noticed without being inappropriate. As the last guests departed and we began the cleanup process, my colleague Maya sidled up beside me. "So," she said, her voice low and teasing, "want to explain why Ryan Whitaker looked ready to commit murder when his dad kissed you goodnight?" I managed a non-committal shrug. "James and I have become friends. Ryan isn't taking the breakup well." "Friends." Maya's skeptical tone made it clear she suspected more. "Well, whatever's happening, be careful. Office gossip says Ryan's been on a rampage at work lately, something about family disloyalty." I absorbed this information with secret satisfaction. The plan was working even better than I'd anticipated. Ryan was already suffering the consequences of discovering his father's interest in me, imagining scenarios that might or might not come to pass. The following day, I received a text from James. "Thank you for a wonderful evening. The painting will be delivered tomorrow. Perhaps you could advise on its placement this weekend. My home office has several possibilities." I replied with carefully measured enthusiasm, accepting the invitation for Saturday afternoon. Then I set my phone aside and opened my laptop, navigating to the Facebook profile I'd been avoiding since the breakup. Vanessa's page showed recent activity, photos of a party I hadn't been invited to, our mother's arm around her shoulders, both smiling as if nothing had been shattered. The sight made my stomach turn, but I forced myself to continue scrolling until I found what I was looking for. A tagged photo from 3 days ago showing Vanessa and Ryan at a coffee shop, their heads close together in what appeared to be serious conversation. So they were still seeing each other. The betrayal wasn't a one-time mistake, but the beginning of something they deemed worth pursuing despite the destruction it had caused. I closed the laptop with shaking hands, a fresh wave of hurt and anger washing over me. My revenge wasn't just justified, it was necessary. They had moved on together, building happiness on the ruins of my trust. Why shouldn't I create something of my own from those same ruins? Saturday arrived with unexpected nerves fluttering in my stomach. I dressed carefully in slim-fitting jeans and a soft cashmere sweater that suggested casual elegance rather than obvious seduction. This visit to James's home needed to balance intimacy with plausible deniability. We were friends, former almost family, discussing art placement. Nothing inappropriate. James lived in a modernist house overlooking Lake Washington, a striking structure of glass and cedar that I'd visited for family dinners during my relationship with Ryan. It felt strange to approach it alone, to press the doorbell as a guest with a very different purpose than before. James answered promptly, dressed similarly casually in dark jeans and a light sweater that emphasized his still-fit physique. At 54, he maintained the athleticism that had been part of his life since college rowing days, another contrast with Ryan, who complained about the gym but rarely attended. "Mia, welcome." His smile seemed genuinely pleased as he ushered me inside. "Can I offer you something to drink? Coffee, wine?" "Coffee would be perfect," I replied, following him into the open-plan kitchen with its panoramic lake view. I'd always loved this house, its thoughtful design and connection to the landscape representing everything Ryan's sterile apartment lacked. As James prepared espresso with practiced ease, I noticed subtle changes to the space since my last visit. New artwork, different furniture arrangements, a more personal touch than when I'd visited with Ryan. This was James's private domain, reflecting his tastes without compromise. "The painting was delivered this morning," he said, handing me a perfect espresso. "It's in my office upstairs. I've been considering several locations. We carried our coffees upstairs to a space I'd never entered during previous visits, James's home office, a warm room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and large windows overlooking the water. The painting sat carefully propped against a chair, its abstract swirls of blue and gold catching the afternoon light. "What do you think?" James gestured to the wall behind his desk. "Here, where I'd see it while working, or perhaps opposite, where visitors would notice it first." I considered the options thoughtfully, conscious of his proximity as we moved around the space, discussing light and perspective. There was something intimate about being consulted for my professional opinion in his private workspace, a reversal of power dynamics that felt significant. "Here," I finally decided, indicating the wall perpendicular to his desk. "The morning light will bring out the gold tones, and you'll still see it peripherally while working." James nodded, studying the wall. "Perfect choice. I should have tools downstairs to hang it properly." As he moved to leave, I stopped him with a light touch on his arm. "Before you go, may I ask why you bought this particular piece?" There were more valuable works available. He turned to face me, his expression thoughtful. "Do you remember our conversation at the gallery exhibition a few weeks ago? About finding beauty in unexpected places?" I nodded, surprised he would reference it. "This painting reminds me of that discussion. It's not obviously beautiful at first glance. It requires attention, engagement. The reward comes from the time invested in seeing it properly." His eyes held mine. "That's rare in art. And in people." The moment stretched between us, heavy with implication. I became acutely aware of how alone we were, how private this space felt compared to the public venues of our previous meetings. "James," I began, uncertain exactly what I intended to say. "I know," he interrupted softly. "This is complicated, Mia. The timing, the circumstances." He hesitated. "Ryan came to see me after the auction. He had rather pointed questions about our relationship." My pulse quickened. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That I enjoy your company, that we share interests and perspectives, and that my relationship with you is separate from whatever happened between the two of you." His gaze was steady. I also told him I'm not in the habit of justifying my personal connections to anyone, including my son. Pride and satisfaction bloomed in my chest, alongside something more complex, a genuine appreciation for this man who saw me clearly and valued what he saw. "Thank you for that," I said simply. James nodded, then moved toward the door. "I'll get those tools. Make yourself comfortable." Alone in his office, I took the opportunity to observe the personal details: family photos including a much younger Ryan, books that revealed intellectual interests, small mementos that hinted at a life fully lived. Among them was a framed photograph of a beautiful woman with Ryan's eyes and a brilliant smile, Catherine, James's late wife, looking vibrant and alive. I was studying it when James returned with a toolbox and level. He noticed my attention and approached, setting the tools aside. "She would have liked you," he said quietly. Catherine could always spot authenticity in people. "She was beautiful," I replied, feeling a twinge of something like guilt as I remembered why I was here, in this man's private space. "Ryan has her eyes, yes, but not her spirit." James took the photograph, looking at it with lingering love before returning it to its place. Catherine lived honestly even when it was difficult, especially then. The implied criticism of his son wasn't lost on me. James had clearly taken Ryan's betrayal as a personal disappointment, a failure of character that reflected poorly on his parenting. We hung the painting together, our bodies moving in unexpected harmony as we measured, marked, and positioned the artwork. When it was securely in place, we stepped back to admire the effect. "Perfect," James declared, his hand coming to rest lightly at the small of my back. "You have an exceptional eye." I turned toward him, suddenly very aware of the narrow space between us, of the warmth of his hand through my sweater. "I'm glad you like it." His eyes searched mine, looking for permission or hesitation, I couldn't tell which. Then slowly, deliberately, he leaned forward and kissed me. It was gentle, questioning rather than demanding, giving me every opportunity to pull away. Instead, I found myself responding, my hands coming up to rest against his chest as the kiss deepened. When we separated, I felt dizzy with conflicting emotions: triumph that my plan was succeeding, guilt over manipulating his genuine feelings, and most disturbingly, actual attraction to this man who was showing me consideration Ryan never had. "I apologize if that was presumptuous," James said, his voice slightly rough. "It wasn't." I tried to sort through my tangled reactions. "But it is complicated." "Yes." He stepped back slightly, giving me space. "And I don't want to be something you regret, Mia, or something you pursue for the wrong reasons." The perceptiveness of his comment startled me. "What do you mean?" He smiled sadly. "I'm not naive. Part of you may see a relationship with me as a form of justice, a way to hurt Ryan as he hurt you. I understand that impulse, even respect the symmetry of it. But I'm not interested in being a weapon in that battle." Shame washed over me, hot and uncomfortable. Was I so transparent? Or was James simply more insightful than I'd given him credit for? "That's not," I began, but couldn't bring myself to complete the lie. "It's more complicated than that." "I'm sure it is." His tone was kind rather than accusatory. Emotions rarely have single, simple motivations. "But I need to know that whatever is developing between us is primarily about us, not about Ryan." I looked away, unable to meet his gaze as my carefully constructed plan threatened to collapse. The truth was, I didn't know anymore what my primary motivation was. The line between revenge and genuine connection had blurred in ways I hadn't anticipated. "I don't have a simple answer for you," I admitted finally. "Yes, the idea of Ryan discovering we're involved holds a certain satisfaction. I won't pretend otherwise. But that's not the only reason I'm here." James considered this, nodding slowly. "Fair enough. Honesty is a good starting point. Where do we go from here?" I asked, feeling suddenly uncertain. "Carefully," he replied with a small smile. "And on equal terms. No hidden agendas, no using each other to settle other scores." He reached for my hand, holding it gently between his. "If something is developing between us, let's give it the respect of honesty." I nodded, though inwardly I wrestled with what this meant for my revenge. Could I pursue both authentic connection with James and the vindication I still craved? Or would I need to choose between them? The question remained unresolved as we moved downstairs, the moment's intensity giving way to a more comfortable interaction. James prepared lunch, a simple but elegant meal of grilled fish and vegetables that we ate on the deck overlooking the lake. Our conversation returned to safer topics: art, books, travel, yet beneath it ran a new current of awareness, possibility, and unspoken questions. When it came time for me to leave, James walked me to my car. "This was lovely," he said, his hand brushing mine. "Though not what I expected when I bought that painting. Life rarely follows our expectations," I replied, thinking of how dramatically my own had been upended in recent months. "Indeed." He leaned in to kiss me again, this one briefer but no less affecting. "I'm having dinner with Ryan tomorrow. He's been insistent about clearing the air between us." My stomach tightened. "Will you tell him about this?" "Not specifically, but I won't lie if he asks directly." James's expression was resolute. "I've never lied to my son, and I won't start now, even if I disagree with his recent choices." I nodded, understanding but anxious. This was the moment when my revenge plot intersected with real emotions, real relationships. The consequences would extend beyond my careful planning. "Let me know how it goes?" I asked. "Of course." He opened my car door for me. "And Mia? Whatever happens with Ryan, I'd like to continue exploring us, if you're interested." The sincerity in his voice made my chest tight with guilt and something sweeter. "I'd like that too." As I drove away, my emotions warred within me. The revenge I'd so carefully planned was proceeding perfectly. James was interested, Ryan was already suffering, and the symmetry of the betrayal was elegant. Yet I found myself genuinely caring about James's feelings, reluctant to hurt this man who had shown me nothing but respect and understanding. I had set out to use James Whittaker as a weapon against his son. Instead, I was discovering a connection I hadn't expected and hadn't planned for. The perfect revenge was becoming messier, more complicated, and potentially more painful for everyone involved, including me. That night, lying in my small apartment bed, I stared at the ceiling and tried to untangle the competing impulses within me. The satisfaction of knowing Ryan was upset, imagining his reaction when he confirmed his suspicions. The warmth that spread through me when I remembered James's kiss, his thoughtful insights, his gentle perception. My phone chimed with a text from James. "Thinking of you. Let's talk after my dinner with Ryan tomorrow." Before I could respond, another message arrived, this one from an unknown number. "I know what you're doing. It won't work." A chill ran down my spine. The message could only be from Ryan. He'd likely changed numbers, knowing I'd blocked his previous one. The fact that he'd reached out this way, with this particular accusation, suggested James had already spoken to him, or that Ryan's suspicions had solidified into certainty. I left both messages unanswered, suddenly exhausted by the emotional complexities I'd created. What had begun as a clear path to justice had become a tangled web of genuine feelings and calculated moves, the boundaries between them increasingly blurred. The revenge I'd sought was within reach, yet pursuing it might cost me the unexpected connection I'd found with James. For the first time since discovering Ryan and Vanessa's betrayal, I found myself questioning whether revenge was truly what I wanted most. Sleep eluded me as I wrestled with the decision before me. Continue as planned, using my connection with James to hurt Ryan regardless of the collateral damage to all three of us? Or acknowledge the genuine feelings developing between James and me, abandoning revenge for the possibility of something authentic? By morning, I still had no answer, only the uneasy recognition that the path ahead was far less clear than I had once believed. The perfect revenge had become imperfect, complicated by the messy reality of human connection. And I was no longer certain which I valued more, the cold satisfaction of vengeance or the warm possibility of something real with a man who saw me clearly and valued what he saw. The question remained unresolved as I prepared for the day ahead, knowing that James's dinner with Ryan would force a reckoning I wasn't entirely prepared to face. Sunday passed with excruciating slowness as I waited for news of James's dinner with Ryan. I cleaned my tiny apartment from top to bottom, rearranged my meager furniture, and sorted through artwork I hadn't yet hung, anything to keep my hands busy while my mind raced with possibilities. Would Ryan confront his father directly about our relationship? Would James acknowledge what had happened between us? And most troublingly, what did I actually want to happen? The text from James finally came at 9:43 p.m. Dinner was difficult. "Can we talk tomorrow? I could come by the gallery during your lunch break." The brevity and neutral tone told me nothing about what had transpired, leaving me to imagine scenarios ranging from minor disagreement to complete family rupture. I replied with equal restraint, agreeing to meet him at the small cafe near the gallery at noon. Sleep was fitful, punctuated by dreams where I was alternately triumphant over a devastated Ryan and racked with guilt while James looked at me with disappointment. I woke exhausted, the emotional toll of my revenge plot weighing more heavily than I'd anticipated. At work, I moved through the morning in a fog, barely registering Maya's concerned glances or my supervisor's questions about the upcoming exhibition. As noon approached, my anxiety peaked. I reapplied my lipstick, smoothed my hair, and walked the short distance to the cafe with my heart hammering against my ribs. James was already there, seated at a corner table with 2 coffees waiting. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes more pronounced than usual, but he stood as I approached, leaning in to kiss my cheek with public restraint. "Thank you for meeting me," he said as we sat. "Of course." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, steadying myself. "How did it go with Ryan?" James sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. "About as well as you might expect. He's convinced that our connection ... is solely motivated by revenge on your part and misplaced loyalty on mine." "And what did you tell him?" My voice was steadier than I felt. "The truth as I understand it." His eyes met mine across the table. "That we've developed a genuine connection that exists independently of whatever happened between the two of you. That while the timing might appear suspicious, adults are capable of recognizing real compatibility when they find it." A wave of shame washed over me. James was defending a relationship he believed was authentic, while I had initiated it with calculated revenge in mind. Yet his words resonated with what I was beginning to feel, that whatever had started as vengeance had evolved into something more complex and potentially real. "Ryan didn't take that well," I guessed. That would be an understatement. James's mouth tightened. "He accused me of betraying him, of violating some sort of code by becoming involved with his ex. When I pointed out that his own actions precipitated your breakup, he became defensive, claiming that what happened between him and your sister was complicated and that I couldn't possibly understand." The mention of Vanessa reignited my anger. Did he explain that complexity? Did he offer any justification beyond selfishness and disregard for people who trusted them? "He tried." James looked troubled. "He said their connection ... had been building for some time, that they'd tried to fight it out of loyalty to you, but ultimately couldn't deny their feelings." The words hit me like a physical blow. What I'd discovered hadn't been a momentary lapse or drunken mistake. It had been an ongoing emotional affair, a deliberate choice made repeatedly despite knowing the pain it would cause. The betrayal was deeper, more calculated than I'd allowed myself to believe. "I see," I managed, my voice tight. James reached across the table, covering my hand with his. For what it's worth, I didn't accept that explanation. There are ways to handle these situations with integrity, being honest before acting on feelings, ending one relationship before beginning another. What Ryan and your sister did was cowardly, regardless of how they try to justify it. His support should have felt validating, but instead, it intensified my guilt. Here was a man defending my honor while unaware of my own questionable motives. "What happens now?" I asked, deflecting from my internal conflict. "That depends largely on us." James's expression was serious but gentle. "Ryan has made it clear that pursuing a relationship with you would damage his relationship with me, possibly irrevocably. He sees it as choosing you over him. The victory I'd sought was within reach. Ryan hurt, betrayed by the father he admired, experiencing a fraction of the pain he'd caused me. Yet it felt hollow now, tainted by the genuine care I was developing for James. I would never want to come between you and your son," I said, the words automatic but not entirely honest. "That's Ryan's choice, not yours." James's voice was firm. "I won't allow my adult son to dictate my personal life through emotional manipulation. That said," he paused, his expression softening, "I need to know that what's developing between us is real, Mia. That we're building something based on genuine connection, not reaction to past hurts." The moment of truth had arrived, demanding a decision I wasn't prepared to make. Continue the deception, pursuing revenge at the cost of James's trust and my own integrity? Or abandon vengeance for the possibility of authentic connection with a man who deserved better than to be used as a weapon? "I can't give you absolute certainty," I admitted, deciding on a partial truth. When we reconnected, part of me was still raw from Ryan's betrayal. I can't pretend that didn't influence my openness to developing a relationship with you. He nodded, accepting this without surprise. That's natural. We're all shaped by our experiences, positive and negative. But, I continued, finding my way toward honesty, what's happened since has surprised me. The way you listen, the way you see me as a whole person rather than an accessory to your life. That's something I never had with Ryan. That's real. It wasn't a complete confession, but it wasn't a lie either. The feelings developing for James were genuine, even if they'd grown from soil contaminated by revenge. James studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, the tension in his shoulders visibly easing. That's all I needed to hear. The beginning matters less than where we go from here. We spent the rest of my lunch break discussing lighter topics, the heaviness of the conversation giving way to more comfortable exchange. Yet, as I returned to the gallery, questions continued to plague me. Was I abandoning my revenge or merely reframing it? Could a relationship built on such a foundation ever be truly healthy? And most troublingly, was I becoming the very thing I despised, someone who justified deception in the name of personal happiness? These questions remained unanswered as James and I began seeing each other openly over the following weeks. We attended concerts and gallery openings, had dinner at restaurants throughout the city, spent quiet evenings discussing books and art in his lake house living room. To any observer, we appeared to be a normal couple enjoying the early stages of romance, the only unusual element being the age difference, which seemed increasingly irrelevant as our connection deepened. Ryan's response was exactly what I'd initially hoped for: thinly veiled fury, pained avoidance, and according to James, increasingly erratic behavior at work. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I found myself troubled by the collateral damage my plan had caused, the strain between father and son, the fragmentation of a family already diminished by loss. 6 weeks after our first kiss, James invited me to spend the weekend at his house. We both understood the significance of this invitation, the deliberate step toward physical intimacy we'd been cautiously approaching. I accepted with genuine anticipation mixed with lingering guilt. The evening began perfectly. James cooked an impressive dinner, we shared a bottle of excellent wine, and conversation flowed with the easy rhythm we'd established. As darkness fell, we moved to the couch, the physical space between us gradually diminishing until I was nestled against him, his arm around my shoulders, my head resting against his chest. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice a low rumble beneath my ear. "This gallery opportunity in Chicago you mentioned, you should apply." I'd told him about the assistant curatorship at a prestigious Chicago gallery, a significant step up from my current position, but one that would require relocation. I've been on the fence about it. My life is here, complicated as it's become. Sometimes distance provides perspective. His fingers traced patterns on my arm. And I'm not averse to visiting Chicago regularly. It's only a few hours by plane. The implication was clear. He saw our relationship continuing even if I moved, was willing to invest in making it work long distance. It was more commitment than Ryan had ever shown, even when we lived together. "You'd want to continue this? Even with the distance?" I asked, tilting my head to see his face. "Mia," his expression was serious, intent, "what we've found is rare. I wouldn't let geography interfere with that." The sincerity in his voice made my chest tight with conflicting emotions. Pleasure at being valued so highly, guilt over the deception that had brought us together. Impulses warred within me, confess everything, or continue accepting his genuine care while hiding my initial motives. Before I could decide, his phone rang. He glanced at it with annoyance, then concern crossed his features. "It's Ryan. He never calls this late." He looked at me apologetically. "I should take this." I nodded, sitting up to give him space as he answered. "Ryan, what's wrong?" Even without speakerphone, I could hear Ryan's voice, loud and slightly slurred. "Is she there?" "I bet she is. Your perfect revenge girlfriend." James's expression hardened. "Ryan, you're clearly intoxicated. This isn't the time." "No, it's exactly the time." Ryan's voice rose. "Tell her I know what she's doing. Tell her it's pathetic." James stood, moving toward the kitchen for privacy, but I could still hear fragments of his responses, calm, firm statements punctuated by longer silences as he listened to whatever drunken accusations Ryan was making. I sat frozen on the couch, my revenge fantasy transformed into uncomfortable reality. This was what I'd wanted. Ryan hurt, jealous, destabilized by seeing his father with me. So why did victory taste so bitter? When James returned, his expression was troubled. I apologize for that interruption. Ryan is struggling. What did he say? I asked, though I could guess the substance if not the specifics. James sighed, settling beside me again. Nothing worth repeating. He's angry, hurt, and not handling either emotion maturely. Did he ask you to end things with me? Among other demands. James took my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. I made it clear that's not happening. Relief and guilt warred within me. The revenge was working perfectly. Ryan was tormented by our relationship, exactly as I'd planned. Yet the cost was higher than I'd anticipated. James caught between son and lover, Ryan's pain spilling over into self-destructive behavior, and my own conscience increasingly troubled by the deception at the foundation of our connection. Maybe we should slow down, I suggested, the words surprising me as much as James. Give Ryan time to adjust. James studied me with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see more than I intended to reveal. Is that what you want? Or are you trying to protect me from a difficult situation with my son? Both, maybe. I looked away. I don't want to be the reason your relationship with Ryan falls apart. Whatever happened between us, he's still your son. Yes, he is. James's voice was thoughtful, which is why I need to hold him accountable for his choices rather than indulge his attempt to control mine. He turned my face gently toward his. Unless you're having second thoughts about us? The question demanded an honesty I wasn't sure I was capable of. How could I explain that my second thoughts weren't about my feelings for him, but about the revenge that had initiated them? That I was increasingly torn between continuing a deception that was achieving its intended purpose and confessing a truth that might destroy something genuinely valuable? No second thoughts, I said finally. Just concerns about the complexity of the situation. James nodded, accepting this explanation. Complexity seems to be the theme of our relationship, but I believe what we're building is worth navigating that complexity. Later, as we moved from the couch to his bedroom, I tried to silence the voice of conscience with the physical reality of connection. James was a considerate, attentive lover, focused on my pleasure in ways that made Ryan's performance-oriented approach seem juvenile by comparison. In the intensity of physical intimacy, I could almost forget the deception that had brought us to this moment. Almost, but not completely. As I lay beside him afterward, watching the moonlight-patterned shadows across the ceiling, the truth pressed against me with renewed urgency. The revenge I had sought was complete. Ryan was suffering, jealous, forced to confront the reality of his father's relationship with his ex-girlfriend. Yet instead of satisfaction, I felt increasingly trapped by my own machinations. "What are you thinking?" James asked softly, his fingers tracing my shoulder. I turned toward him, studying the face that had become dear to me despite my initial intentions. That life takes unexpected turns. Indeed it does. He smiled, kissing me softly. Sometimes those turns lead us exactly where we need to be, even if it's not where we plan to go. His words resonated uncomfortably with my situation. Had this revenge plot inadvertently led me to something more valuable than vengeance? And if so, could that something survive the truth of how it began? I didn't have answers as I drifted to sleep in James's arms, but I knew the questions would only grow more insistent with time, demanding resolution I wasn't sure I was brave enough to provide. The morning brought no clarity, only the practical reality of breakfast and coffee, comfortable domestic moments that felt simultaneously natural and fraudulent. James had early meetings, so I returned to my apartment to prepare for work, my mind circling the same questions without resolution. At the gallery, I moved through my duties mechanically until Maya cornered me in the storage room, her expression concerned. "You okay? You've been spacing out all morning." "Just tired." I deflected. "Late night?" Her eyebrows rose suggestively. "With Silver Fox Whitaker, I presume? Things getting serious there?" "It's complicated." I arranged prints in their storage sleeves, avoiding her gaze. "Because he's Ryan's dad? Yeah, that's next-level complicated. But also kind of perfect revenge, if you ask me." I froze, her casual assessment hitting too close to home. "That's not why I'm seeing him." "No?" Maya's tone was skeptical. "Come on, Mia. After what Ryan and your sister did, dating his dad is like cosmic justice." "I'm not judging, I'm impressed." "It's not like that," I insisted, the defense feeling hollow even to my own ears. James and I connected over shared interests. The fact that he's Ryan's father is incidental. Sure. Maya clearly didn't believe me. "Well, whatever your motives, Ryan is definitely suffering. Lisa told me he showed up at Vanessa's place completely wasted last night, making some scene that had the neighbors calling security. This new information landed like a stone in my stomach. What happened? Not sure exactly, but apparently he was shouting about betrayal and karma. Vanessa called your mom, who managed to calm him down eventually. Maya shrugged. Lisa thought you'd want to know, though she wasn't sure how to tell you directly. My carefully orchestrated revenge was spiraling beyond my control, affecting not just Ryan but dragging in Vanessa, my mother, even the neighbors of my sister's apartment building. The collateral damage was expanding, ripples extending outward from the initial deception. I need some air, I mumbled, pushing past Maya toward the back exit. In the alley behind the gallery, I leaned against the brick wall, trying to steady my breathing. This wasn't what I wanted, not exactly. I'd wanted Ryan to hurt, yes, to experience the betrayal I'd felt, but I hadn't anticipated the messy reality of that pain, the way it would affect others, the way it would continue to reverberate through connected lives. And I certainly hadn't expected to care so deeply about James, to value his respect and affection to the point where the thought of losing him over my initial deception was becoming unbearable. I pulled out my phone, staring at the screen for long moments before making a decision. I needed perspective from someone who understood the full picture. I typed a quick message to Lisa. Need to talk. Can you meet after work? Her response came immediately. My place, 6 p.m. Wine will be waiting. The rest of the workday passed in a blur of administrative tasks and visitor interactions performed on autopilot. At 6, I arrived at Lisa's apartment to find not just wine but pizza and a sympathetic ear waiting. Maya told me you seemed upset when she mentioned Ryan's meltdown. Lisa said after I'd settled on her couch with a generous pour of red. I didn't expect things to get so messy. I stared into my wine glass as if it might contain answers. People are getting hurt who weren't even part of my plan. Lisa's expression shifted from sympathy to confusion. Your plan? What are you talking about, Mia? The realization that I hadn't fully confided in anyone, not even my best friend, hit me with surprising force. I'd kept the calculated nature of my relationship with James private, perhaps knowing on some level that speaking it aloud would force me to confront the morality of my actions. I didn't start seeing James by accident. I admitted, the confession both terrifying and relieving. After I found Ryan and Vanessa together, after they continued seeing each other like what they'd done was justified, I wanted Ryan to hurt the way I was hurting. And what better way than to make him watch his father fall for me? Lisa's eyes widened. You deliberately seduced James Whittaker as revenge against Ryan? Put so bluntly, it sounded worse than I'd allowed myself to acknowledge. Initially, yes. I manufactured our chance meeting, cultivated a connection I knew would devastate Ryan when he discovered it. Holy shit, Mia. Lisa looked equal parts impressed and concerned. That's methodical and manipulative and deceptive. I set down my wine, suddenly nauseous. Exactly the qualities I despised in Ryan and Vanessa. Okay, let's not go that far. Lisa's pragmatism asserted itself. You didn't betray someone who trusted you completely. You created a new relationship, perhaps with questionable motives, but it's not equivalent to what they did. Maybe not, I conceded, but it's still built on a lie. James believes our connection was organic, that my interest in him is entirely about him. He has no idea he was initially just a means to hurt his son. Initially, Lisa repeated, emphasizing the word. But it doesn't sound like that's still the case. You genuinely care about him now, don't you? The question demanded honesty I'd been avoiding even with myself. Yes, I admitted quietly. James is everything Ryan isn't. Attentive, respectful, genuinely interested in my thoughts and feelings. What started as revenge has become something real, at least on my side. Then what's the problem? Lisa asked pragmatically. So your motivations were impure at the beginning. Relationships start for all kinds of random reasons. What matters is what they become. The problem is that James deserves better than a relationship founded on deception. I stood, pacing the small living room. He explicitly asked if I was using him to get back at Ryan, and I lied. Not completely, but I certainly didn't tell him the whole truth. And if you tell him now, he'll end things. Of this I was certain. James values honesty and integrity. He wouldn't understand or forgive this level of manipulation. Lisa considered this, refilling her wine glass. So your options are to continue a relationship that's become meaningful but is based on a lie, or confess and almost certainly lose that relationship. Exactly. The simplicity of her summary made my chest ache with the impossibility of the choice. And option 1 is becoming increasingly untenable because your revenge is working a little too well, with Ryan melting down in ways that are affecting innocent bystanders. I nodded, sinking back onto the couch. Plus, I'm starting to hate myself for the deception. Every time James looks at me with trust and affection, I feel like a fraud. Quite the ethical quandary you've created, Lisa observed, not unkindly. For what it's worth, I think your chances with James might not be as hopeless as you believe. If what you have now is genuine, he might be able to forgive how it started. Would you? I challenged. If someone deliberately entered your life as a calculated act of revenge against someone else, would you trust anything that developed from that? Lisa winced. Okay, fair point. But people have overcome worse starts. She paused, studying me. The real question is, what do you want more? To continue exacting revenge on Ryan, or to have an honest relationship with James? The question crystallized the choice before me with uncomfortable clarity, continuing as I was meant achieving the revenge I'd sought, but at the cost of personal integrity and the potential for genuine connection. Confessing meant almost certainly losing James, but reclaiming my moral center and ending the expanding cycle of pain my revenge was creating. I don't know, I admitted, though even as I spoke I recognized the lie. I did know. I just wasn't sure I was brave enough to act on that knowledge. Lisa squeezed my hand. Sleep on it. Sometimes clarity comes with distance. But as I lay in my own bed that night, clarity remained elusive. My phone chimed with a text from James. Missing you. Dinner tomorrow? The simple message, evidence of genuine care, deepened my turmoil. The revenge that had seemed so justified, so elegant in its symmetry, had become a prison of my own making, trapping me between the satisfaction of vindication and the guilt of ongoing deception. Something had to give. I just wasn't sure what I was willing to sacrifice to find my way back to the person I wanted to be. The decision crystallized unexpectedly the next morning as I scrolled through social media over coffee. There, on my feed, was a photo posted by a mutual acquaintance, Ryan and Vanessa at a small gathering, his arm around her shoulders, her smile directed up at him with unmistakable affection. The caption read, "Love finds a way, even through complicated beginnings." The image should have rekindled my anger, reinforced my determination to make Ryan suffer for his betrayal. Instead, it provoked a surprising realization. While I'd been consumed with revenge, they had moved forward. They'd weathered the consequences of their actions and were building something new, perhaps founded on betrayal, but no longer defined by it. Meanwhile, I remained trapped in the amber of that moment of discovery, my every action since determined by their transgression rather than my own desires. The revenge that was supposed to free me from pain had instead kept me bound to it, unable to truly move forward. With sudden clarity, I knew what I had to do. It wouldn't be easy, and it would almost certainly cost me a relationship I'd come to value deeply. But continuing the deception was costing me something even more fundamental, my sense of who I was and wanted to be. I texted James, "Can we meet tonight? There's something important I need to discuss." His response came quickly, "Of course. My place at 7? I'll cook." The hours until our meeting stretched interminably. I moved through work in a fog of anticipation and dread, rehearsing what I would say, how I would explain the inexcusable without seeming to excuse it. By the time I arrived at James's lakeside home, my nerves were stretched to breaking point. He greeted me with a kiss and a glass of wine, leading me to the kitchen where dinner preparations were underway. The domestic normalcy of the scene, James chopping vegetables, music playing softly, the table set for an intimate meal, made what I had to do even more difficult. "You seem serious in your message," he noted, adding herbs to a simmering sauce. "Everything all right?" "Not exactly." I set down my barely touched wine. "James, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be difficult to hear." He turned from the stove, giving me his full attention. "That sounds ominous." "It is." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Our relationship, how it started, it wasn't as coincidental as I let you believe." A flicker of confusion crossed his face. "What do you mean?" "After I discovered Ryan and Vanessa together, after they continued seeing each other despite the destruction they'd caused, I wanted revenge." The words came faster now, tumbling out before I could lose my nerve. I remembered how you and I had connected over art, how Ryan had always been somewhat intimidated by your approval. And I thought, what better way to hurt him than to make him watch his father choose me? Understanding dawned in James's eyes, followed quickly by disbelief. "Are you saying our entire relationship was calculated? A performance designed to hurt Ryan?" Initially, yes. The admission burned like acid. That day I ran into you at Luciano's, it wasn't chance. I knew your schedule. I orchestrated that meeting and everything that followed, at least in the beginning. James set down the knife he'd been holding, his expression shuddering. I see. But what I didn't anticipate, I continued desperately, was how real it would become. How much I would come to value our connection, to care about you as a person rather than just as a means to an end. And I'm supposed to believe that? His voice was quiet, but with an undercurrent of anger I'd never heard before. That your feelings transformed from calculated manipulation to genuine care somewhere along the way? That's remarkably convenient, Mia. The skepticism was deserved, but it still stung. I know how it sounds. I know I've given you every reason to doubt anything I say. But the truth is, I'm telling you this precisely because what's developed between us has become too important to continue building on a lie. James moved away from the stove, putting physical distance between us as he processed my confession. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft bubbling of the sauce he'd abandoned. Ryan tried to warn me, he said finally. He said you were using me to get back at him. I defended you, told him he was projecting his own guilt. A bitter laugh escaped him. Turns out he understood your motivations better than I did. I'm sorry. The words were woefully inadequate, but they were all I had. I never intended to hurt you. Just my son. His eyes met mine, hard with disappointment. Using me as the weapon. Put that way, my actions seemed even more calculating, more cruel. Yes, I admitted, and I've come to regret that decision deeply. Why tell me now? He asked, his analytical mind seeking patterns even in betrayal. What changed? I considered prevaricating, offering a noble explanation that might salvage some tiny part of his respect. But I'd come this far with honesty. I wouldn't falter now. I saw a photo of Ryan and Vanessa together, happy despite everything. And I realized they'd moved forward while I was still living in the moment of betrayal, letting it dictate my choices. I looked down at my hands. I also realized I couldn't bear to continue lying to you, not when you've shown me nothing but honesty and respect. James nodded slowly, absorbing this. At least that has the ring of truth. He turned away, switching off the stove with deliberate care. I think you should go, Mia. Though expected, the dismissal still felt like a physical blow. James, please. His voice was controlled but strained. I need time to process this. Right now, I can't separate what was real from what was manufactured. I stood, gathering my purse with numb fingers. At the kitchen doorway, I paused. For what it's worth, these past weeks with you have been the most genuine connection I've experienced in years. I just wish it had begun honestly. He didn't respond, his back still turned to me. I let myself out, the door closing behind me with a quiet finality that seemed to mark the end of both my revenge and any possibility of a relationship with James Whittaker. The drive home passed in a blur of tears and recrimination. I had done the right thing, I was certain, yet it offered little comfort in the face of what I'd lost, not just James, but the potential for something meaningful and lasting that had grown from such tainted soil. At home, I collapsed onto my bed fully clothed, emotionally exhausted. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. How did it go? But I couldn't summon the energy to respond. The full weight of consequences, both intended and unintended, pressed down on me like a physical presence. I had wanted Ryan to experience betrayal as I had. In that, I'd succeeded beyond expectation. But I hadn't anticipated becoming the betrayer in a different relationship, causing pain to someone who had shown me only kindness and understanding. The irony was bitter. In seeking revenge for betrayal, I had become the very thing I despised. And in the process, I'd lost something potentially precious, a connection that had started as calculation, but evolved into genuine care. The tears came then, not just for the loss of James, but for the person I'd allowed myself to become in the aftermath of pain. Revenge had seemed like justice in the abstract. In reality, it had only created more suffering, much of it now my own. Hours or minutes later, time had lost meaning. My phone rang. James's name appeared on the screen, sending my heart into a panicked rhythm. I answered with a shaky hello? I've been thinking about what you told me, he said without preamble, his voice carefully neutral. And I have some questions, if you're willing to answer them honestly. Of course, I managed, sitting up and wiping away tears. Anything. When did it change for you? When did your feelings become genuine, if indeed they did? The question was fair, but difficult to answer precisely. It wasn't a single moment, I admitted. More a gradual shift. but I think I first recognized it when you called me out, that day in your office when you said you weren't interested in being a weapon in my battle with Ryan. The fact that you saw the possibility and confronted it directly, it made me question what I was doing and why. There was a pause as he considered this. And tonight, confessing the truth, knowing it would likely end things between us, was that the final act of your revenge plot? Ensuring Ryan would know you'd rejected me rather than the other way around. The question landed like a blow, suggesting a level of manipulation I hadn't considered. No, I said firmly. Ryan never factors into this decision. This was about you and me, about not wanting to continue a relationship built on lies, no matter how much I've come to value it. I see. His tone gave nothing away. One last question, Mia. If you could go back to that moment, discovering Ryan and Vanessa, feeling that initial pain and betrayal, would you make the same choice? Would you still pursue revenge through me? I didn't hesitate. No. I'd find a way to move forward instead of remaining trapped in that moment. I'd recognize that using someone else, especially someone as decent as you, would only create more pain, not heal what was already there. The silence stretched so long I wondered if he'd hung up. Finally, his voice returned, softer now. Thank you for your honesty. I need more time, but I appreciate you telling me the truth, even knowing what it might cost. I understand, I said, though my heart contracted painfully at the absence of any clear path forward. Take all the time you need. After we disconnected, I lay back on my bed, emotionally drained but with a curious sense of lightness. The deception that had been weighing on me was gone, replaced by the clean pain of consequences honestly earned. Whatever happened with James, whether he eventually found a way to forgive or decided the deception was insurmountable, I had reclaimed something essential, my own integrity. The revenge that had consumed me for months no longer seemed important. Ryan and Vanessa would live their lives, making choices both good and bad, experiencing consequences of their own. Their story was no longer the defining narrative of mine. For the first time since walking in on that devastating scene, I felt truly free, not from pain or regret, but from the prison of vengeance I had constructed around myself. Whatever came next would be built on truth, not calculation. And while that truth had cost me dearly, it had also restored something I hadn't realized I'd lost: the ability to move forward unburdened by the weight of deception. As I drifted toward sleep, I remembered James's words from weeks earlier. Sometimes those turns lead us exactly where we need to be, even if it's not where we plan to go. The irony wasn't lost on me, that in seeking revenge, I had instead found my way back to myself. It wasn't the justice I had originally sought, but perhaps it was the one I truly needed. 3 days passed without word from James. I moved through them in a fog of resignation and quiet grief, alternating between periods of acceptance and desperate hope that somehow, against all odds, he might find a way to forgive the unforgivable. At work, I threw myself into preparations for an upcoming exhibition, grateful for tasks that required focus and precision. In the evenings, I began seriously researching the Chicago opportunity, recognizing that regardless of what happened with James, a fresh start might be exactly what I needed. On the 4th day, as I was cataloging new acquisitions in the gallery's storage room, Maya appeared at the door. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her expression unusually serious. I put him in the small conference room. My heart leapt before I could control it. "James?" She shook her head. "Ryan." The name hit me like cold water. What could Ryan possibly want? To gloat over the collapse of my relationship with his father? To demand explanations? To extract further revenge of his own? "Tell him I'm busy," I said, turning back to my cataloging. "He seems pretty determined, Mia. Said he won't leave until you talk to him." I sighed, setting down my tablet. This confrontation had been inevitable from the moment I confessed to James. Better to face it directly than have Ryan creating a scene in the gallery. "Fine. I'll be there in a minute." I took my time, using the short walk to the conference room to compose myself. Whatever Ryan had come to say, I wouldn't allow him to see how much the past weeks had affected me. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. When I entered the room, Ryan was standing at the window, looking out at the street below. He turned as the door closed behind me, and I was struck by how different he appeared. Thinner, with dark circles under his eyes and a tension in his posture I didn't recognize. "Mia." My name sounded strange in his voice after so many months of silence. "Thank you for seeing me. You didn't give me much choice." I remained near the door, maintaining maximum distance between us. "What do you want, Ryan?" He didn't answer immediately, studying me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "You look good," he said finally. "Better than I expected given the circumstances. If you came to gloat about your father ending things with me, you can save your breath." I'm well aware of the irony. Ryan's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's not why I'm here." He hesitated, seeming to struggle with his next words. I wanted to apologize. Of all the things I might have expected, an apology wasn't among them. For what, specifically? Sleeping with my sister? Continuing to see her afterward? Or something more recent? All of it. He moved away from the window, stopping at the conference table between us. "What Vanessa and I did was inexcusable. We hurt you in the worst possible way, and then compounded it by trying to justify our actions." He ran a hand through his hair, a familiar gesture that once would have softened me. "I was selfish and cowardly, and I'm sorry." The apology should have been satisfying, vindication of the pain I'd suffered, acknowledgement of the wrong done to me. Instead, it felt strangely hollow, arriving months too late and under suspicious circumstances. "Why now?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "What's changed?" Ryan looked down at his hands, then back up at me with unexpected directness. "My father told me what you did, and why you finally told him the truth." The revelation that James had discussed our situation with Ryan sent a jolt through me. "I see. At first I was furious," Ryan continued. "Finding out you'd deliberately pursued my father as revenge, it confirmed what I'd suspected all along. I felt justified in my anger in warning him about you. I said nothing, waiting for him to reach the point of this conversation. But then he told me you'd confessed everything, knowing it would likely end your relationship. That you chose honesty even when it cost you something you valued." Ryan's expression turned rueful. "And I realized that's something I never did. I never chose the difficult truth over my own desires. Not with you, not with Vanessa, not with anyone." The admission was surprising in its self-awareness. This wasn't the Ryan I remembered, defensive, quick to justify, resistant to acknowledging fault. "Your father's influence, I presume?" I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. "Partly," Ryan acknowledged. "He's been clarifying in his assessment of my character lately. But it's also Vanessa." That name still provoked a twinge, though less painful than before. "What about her? She ended things between us last week. Said she couldn't build a relationship on a foundation of betrayal and lies." He laughed without humor. "Apparently watching what happened between you and my father made her reconsider our situation. The parallels were too uncomfortable." I absorbed this information with mixed emotions, vindication that my revenge had indirectly affected their relationship after all, but also a curious emptiness where satisfaction should have been. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, not entirely dishonestly. If Vanessa had recognized the moral bankruptcy of their beginning, perhaps she wasn't entirely lost to me. "Are you?" Ryan studied me. "I thought you'd be pleased considering everything." "A few months ago I would have been," I admitted. "Now I'm just tired of the whole cycle of hurt and revenge. It's exhausting, and it doesn't actually fix anything." Ryan nodded slowly. "That's essentially what my father said." He paused, seeming to debate his next words. "He also said you should call him, that he's had enough time to think." My heart skipped a beat. "He said that?" "Yes." Ryan's expression was complex, regretful yet resigned. "For what it's worth, I've never seen him connect with someone the way he did with you. Not since my mother died." I wasn't sure how to respond to this unexpected support from the last person I would have expected to offer it. "Thank you for telling me." Ryan moved toward the door, then stopped, turning back to face me. "One more thing, Mia. I truly am sorry for what I did to you. Not because it blew up in my face, not because I lost Vanessa, but because you deserved better. I hope someday you might be able to forgive me, though I understand if you can't." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the calculated apology I might have expected, designed to alleviate his guilt or serve some hidden agenda. It seemed genuinely remorseful, a recognition of wrong done without expectation of absolution. "I don't know about forgiveness," I said honestly, "but I do accept your apology. And I hope you find a better way forward than either of us has managed so far." He nodded, a small, sad smile crossing his features. "That's more than I deserve. Goodbye, Mia." After he left, I remained in the conference room, trying to process the unexpected encounter. Ryan's apology, Vanessa ending their relationship, James suggesting I call him. It was a lot to absorb at once, a sudden shift in the emotional landscape I'd been navigating. I pulled out my phone, staring at James's contact information. Should I call? What would I say? And more importantly, what could he possibly say that would allow us to move forward from the deception at our foundation? In the end, I texted rather than called. Ryan came to see me. He mentioned you suggested I contact you. I'm available whenever you'd like to talk. The response came faster than I expected. Dinner tonight? My place, 7 p.m. I replied with a simple, I'll be there, and returned to work, though concentration was impossible with the evening's conversation looming. What did James want to say? Was it merely formal closure, a chance to end things definitively but compassionately? Or did he see some path forward that I couldn't yet imagine? By the time I arrived at his lakeside home that evening, my nerves were stretched to breaking point. James greeted me at the door with reserved politeness, leading me to the living room where 2 glasses of wine waited. "Thank you for coming," he said as we sat, maintaining a careful distance between us on the couch. I imagine Ryan's visit was unexpected, to say the least. I took a small sip of wine, needing its steadying effect. He apologized. Genuinely, I think. James nodded. Good. It's a start, at least. He studied me for a moment. "How are you, Mia?" "Truly?" The question, asked with such evident care despite everything, made my throat tight with emotion. "I'm finding my way forward. The Chicago position looks promising. I have an interview next week." "That's excellent news." His smile seemed genuinely pleased for me. "They'd be fortunate to have you." The pleasantries felt like delaying tactics, postponing the real conversation we needed to have. I decided to address it directly. "James, why did you want to see me? If it's to formally end things between us, I understand. You don't owe me any explanations or gentle letdowns." He set down his wine glass, his expression turning serious. "That's not why I asked you here." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "These past days, I've been thinking about trust, deception, and the possibility of redemption." I waited, hardly daring to hope where this might be leading. "What you did, pursuing me as a means of hurting Ryan, was calculating and manipulative," he continued. "It showed a willingness to use another person's genuine feelings as tools for revenge. Under normal circumstances, that would be unforgivable to me." "I understand," I said quietly, preparing myself for the rejection I deserved. "But these weren't normal circumstances." His voice softened. "You'd experienced a profound betrayal by 2 people you trusted completely. That kind of pain can drive us to actions we would normally find unthinkable." I looked up, meeting his gaze. "That doesn't excuse what I did." "No, it doesn't," he agreed. "But it does contextualize it. And more importantly, when the moment of choice came, when continuing the deception would have been easier than facing the consequences of truth, you chose honesty, knowing it would likely cost you our relationship. It was the right thing to do," I said simply. "Late, but still right." James nodded. "That choice matters to me, Mia. It suggests that whatever calculation brought us together, what developed between us was genuine enough to make honesty worth the price." Hope flickered, tentative but persistent. "What are you saying, James?" "I'm saying I believe your feelings evolved from where they began. That what we shared became real for you, as it was for me." He leaned forward slightly. "And I'm suggesting that perhaps we could start again, not forgetting the past, but not allowing it to dictate our future either." The offer was so unexpected, so much more than I deserved, that for a moment I couldn't respond. "Are you sure?" I finally managed. "Could you really trust me after how things began?" "Trust isn't binary, present or absent," he replied thoughtfully. "It's built gradually, through consistent choices that align with our stated values. Your choice to tell me the truth, knowing the consequences, was one such building block." He reached for my hand, holding it gently. "I'm willing to see if we can build more, if you are." Tears threatened, and I blinked them back. "I'd like that very much. But I need you to know I'm still pursuing the Chicago position. I think some distance from Seattle, from Ryan and Vanessa and all the history here, would be good for me." "I understand." His thumb traced circles on my palm, a familiar gesture that sent warmth spreading through me. "Chicago isn't so far, and new beginnings can happen across distances if the people involved are committed." The implication was clear. He was willing to attempt a long-distance relationship, to see if what we'd found could survive both the truth of its origins and the challenge of geography. "I'd like to try," I said softly, "to see if we can build something real from such a complicated beginning." James smiled, the tension in his expression easing. "So would I." He leaned forward then, kissing me with a gentleness that spoke of new beginnings rather than conclusions. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. That would take time and consistent demonstrations of trustworthiness. But it was an opening, a willingness to see if redemption was possible, if something authentic could grow from soil once poisoned by revenge. As I returned his kiss, I felt the last vestiges of my revenge plot dissolving, replaced by something infinitely more valuable, the possibility of genuine connection founded on truth rather than calculation. The path forward wouldn't be easy. Trust once broken is painstaking to rebuild, but for the first time since discovering Ryan and Vanessa's betrayal, I was moving toward something rather than away from pain. 2 months later, I accepted the position in Chicago. James helped me pack my small apartment, making plans for his first visit 2 weeks after my relocation. We spoke daily, rebuilding our connection on a foundation of honest communication and respect for the complicated journey that had brought us together. Ryan and I maintained a cautious distance, though his apology had opened the possibility of eventual civility, if not friendship. Vanessa sent a hesitant email as I prepared to leave Seattle, expressing remorse and hoping for reconciliation someday. I responded with measured openness, not ready to forgive completely, but no longer defined by the betrayal either. The revenge I had so meticulously planned had transformed into something entirely unexpected, not the satisfaction of causing equal pain, but the freedom of choosing a different path. In seeking to make Ryan suffer as I had suffered, I had instead discovered the possibility of happiness beyond betrayal, not in spite of it, but perhaps because of the difficult lessons it had taught me about honesty, integrity, and the true cost of vengeance. As my plane took off from Seattle, carrying me toward a new beginning in Chicago, I thought of the perfect symmetry I had once imagined, Ryan losing someone he valued as I had lost someone I valued. The reality had been messier, more painful, but ultimately more transformative than that simple equation. In the end, the best revenge hadn't been making Ryan suffer, but refusing to let his actions determine my future. By choosing truth over deception, growth over stagnation, possibility over pain, I had reclaimed what his betrayal had temporarily taken from me: the ability to build a life defined by my own choices rather than someone else's actions. It wasn't the revenge I had planned. It was something infinitely better. Chicago greeted me with a late summer storm, sheets of rain slashing against my taxi window as we made our way from O'Hare to my new apartment in Wicker Park. The city seemed to be matching my internal weather, turbulent yet somehow cleansing, washing away the remnants of Seattle and the person I'd been there. "First time in Chicago?" the driver asked, eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. "First time living here?" I replied, trying to inject enthusiasm into my voice despite the exhaustion of the 5-hour flight and the emotional toll of the past few months. "I've visited before. Best city in the world," he declared with the conviction of a true believer. "You'll never want to leave." I smiled non-committally, watching the skyline emerge through the rain-blurred window. I wasn't sure about never wanting to leave. My life had become a series of unexpected turns that made long-term planning seem futile, but I was determined to embrace this fresh start. My apartment was a 6th-floor walk-up in a converted factory building, all exposed brick, pipes, and industrial windows. It was nearly twice the size of my Seattle place for roughly the same rent, one of the perks of leaving the West Coast. The property manager had left the keys with a neighbor, a friendly woman in her 30s who introduced herself as Danny. "Welcome to the building," she said, handing over the keys. "Moving cross-country is brutal. Let me know if you need anything. Best takeout spots, hardware store, whatever." "Thanks," I said, genuinely touched by the kindness of a stranger. "I might take you up on that once I'm settled." Alone in my empty apartment, my furniture and boxes wouldn't arrive until tomorrow. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and finally let myself feel the magnitude of the change I'd made. 3 months ago, I'd been living with Ryan, planning our future together, blissfully unaware of his betrayal with my sister. Now I was in a different city, starting a new job, tentatively building a relationship with his father, and trying to reconstruct an identity that wasn't defined by revenge or pain. My phone chimed with a text from James. "Landed safely?" The simple message made me smile. Despite everything, the complicated beginning of our relationship, the distance now between us, James had become a steady presence in my life, a source of support I'd never expected to find in Ryan's father of all people. "Safe and sound," I replied. "Apartment is perfect. Empty but perfect. Wish I could be there to help you settle in." 2 weeks? I texted back, referring to his planned visit once I'd gotten through the initial adjustment period. Can't wait. I set the phone aside and gazed around the empty space that would become my home. The bare walls and unfilled corners represented possibilities rather than absences, a blank canvas for the next chapter of my life. For the first time in months, the future felt open rather than constrained by the gravitational pull of betrayal and revenge. That night, sleeping on an air mattress with just a suitcase of clothes and necessities, I dreamed of Seattle. Not the Seattle of pain and betrayal, but the city where I'd grown up, where I'd fallen in love with art, where I'd built a life that had meaning beyond my relationship with Ryan. In the dream, I was walking through the Olympic Sculpture Park, the art pieces shifting and changing as I passed, transforming into memories and people. I woke with tears on my cheeks but a curious lightness in my chest, as if something had begun to heal while I slept. My first day at the Brennan Gallery started with a tour from Eliza Brennan herself, a formidable woman in her 60s with steel gray hair cut in a severe bob and an intimidating knowledge of contemporary art. Unlike the small, community-focused gallery I'd worked at in Seattle, the Brennan was a significant player in the Midwest art scene, representing established artists and emerging talents with equal commitment to excellence. "Your portfolio impressed me," Eliza said as she showed me through the main exhibition space, "particularly your curation of the Pacific Northwest Indigenous Artists Show. It showed vision and cultural sensitivity." "Thank you," I replied, both flattered and slightly intimidated. "That was a passion project. All good curation should be," she said with a sharp nod. "Passion with precision. That's what builds a gallery's reputation." The position was a significant step up from my assistant curator role in Seattle. Here I would be handling my own exhibitions, working directly with artists, and having substantial input on the gallery's direction. The responsibility was both exhilarating and terrifying. By the end of the first week, I'd settled into a rhythm: mornings at the gallery, evenings arranging my apartment and exploring my new neighborhood. I spoke to James daily, our conversations ranging from mundane details about my new colleagues to deeper discussions about art, family, and the complex emotions of starting over. He never pressured me to talk about Ryan or Vanessa, but he created space for those conversations when I needed them. "My mother called today," I told him during one of our evening talks, curled up on my new couch with a glass of wine. "First time since I left Seattle." "How did that go?" James's voice was warm but neutral, giving me room to process. "About as well as you'd expect," I sighed, remembering the strained conversation. "She wants me to make peace with Vanessa before the holidays. Says it's destroying the family having us not speaking. And how do you feel about that?" I considered the question honestly. "Not ready," I admitted. "I can acknowledge that what I did, trying to hurt Ryan by pursuing you, wasn't my finest moment. But that doesn't erase what they did." "No, it doesn't," James agreed. "Reconciliation can't be rushed or forced for someone else's comfort." That's exactly it. I felt a rush of gratitude for his understanding. My mother wants to smooth things over for the sake of family harmony, but she's not acknowledging the depth of the betrayal. "My sister and my boyfriend, that's not a small thing to overcome." "It's not," he said simply. "And you get to decide the timeline for healing, not anyone else." The conversation shifted to lighter topics: the latest exhibition I was helping organize, a book James was reading, plans for his upcoming visit. By the time we said goodnight, the tension from my mother's call had dissipated, replaced by the warm certainty of being understood. 2 days before James was scheduled to arrive, I received an email from Vanessa. My finger hovered over the delete button without opening it, part of me wanting to maintain the clean break I'd made by moving away. But another part, the part that had chosen honesty over revenge with James, pushed me to at least read what she had to say. "Dear Mia," it began. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I'll understand if you delete this without reading further. But I needed to try to reach out one more time." I took a deep breath and continued reading. "What Ryan and I did was inexcusable. There's no justification for betraying you that way, and I won't try to offer any. I've spent months trying to understand why I would hurt the person who has been my supporter and protector since we were children. The only answer I've found is that I was selfish and weak, and I let my own wants override what I knew was right. Ryan told me about your relationship with his father, and how it started as revenge but became something real. At first I was angry. It felt like you were doing exactly what we had done. But then he told me how you confessed everything to James, risking losing him because you couldn't continue with the deception. That took courage I'm not sure I would have had. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not even asking for a response to this email. I just wanted you to know that I understand the magnitude of what I did, and I'm truly sorry. I miss my sister, but I know I'm the one who destroyed that relationship. I hope Chicago is everything you need it to be. I hope you're finding your way toward happiness. Love always, Vanessa. I closed the email without replying, tears blurring my vision. The apology seemed sincere, more thoughtful and self-aware than I would have expected from the sister who had always taken the easy path, who had rarely faced consequences for her actions. But it didn't change what had happened, didn't magically repair the trust that had been shattered. Later that night, I mentioned the email to James during our call. "Are you considering responding?" he asked after I'd summarized the contents. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me appreciates that she took responsibility without making excuses, but another part feels like it's too soon. Like responding would signal that we're moving toward reconciliation when I'm not sure that's possible. "You don't have to decide right away," James reminded me. "The email will still be there when and if you're ready to respond." His ability to offer perspective without pushing for a particular outcome was one of the qualities I'd come to value most about our evolving relationship. Unlike Ryan, who had always been quick to offer solutions rather than simply listen, James created space for me to process my own thoughts and feelings. "Enough about Seattle drama?" I said, deliberately changing the subject. "Tell me about your day." James arrived in Chicago on a crisp autumn Friday, the city showing off with clear blue skies and leaves just beginning to turn golden in the parks. I met him at his hotel. We'd decided that having separate spaces during this first visit made sense, given the still evolving nature of our relationship. The sight of him emerging from a taxi, silver hair catching the sunlight, sent a flutter through my chest that confirmed what I'd been feeling during our weeks apart. Whatever complicated path had led us here, my feelings for James were genuine. "You look wonderful," he said, embracing me. "Chicago agrees with you." "It's starting to," I agreed, linking my arm through his. "Let me show you why." We spent the day exploring my new neighborhood, the local coffee shop where I'd become a regular, the small art galleries peppered among vintage stores and restaurants, the farmer's market where I'd discovered a bread vendor whose sourdough rivaled anything in Seattle. It felt significant, sharing these new discoveries with James, integrating him into this fresh chapter of my life. That evening, I gave him a private tour of the Brennan Gallery after hours, proudly showing off the exhibition I'd been helping to organize, a showcase of emerging Midwestern artists working in mixed media. "This is impressive, Mia," James said, studying a large-scale installation piece that combined salvaged industrial materials with delicate handmade paper elements. "The caliber of work here is exceptional." "Eliza has an amazing eye for identifying talent," I replied, though I couldn't help feeling a flush of pleasure at his approval. "But she's given me significant input on this exhibition, especially with the thematic arrangement." We moved through the gallery spaces slowly, discussing each piece, James asking insightful questions about the artists and my curatorial decisions. In these conversations, I felt most completely myself, passionate about art and its ability to communicate complex ideas, engaged with someone who genuinely valued my perspective. "I can see why you took this position," James said as we prepared to leave. "It's a perfect fit for your talents." "It feels right," I agreed, locking the gallery behind us. For the first time in months, I'm excited about the future rather than just trying to escape the past. James took my hand as we walked to the restaurant where we had dinner reservations. "That's all I want for you, Mia. A future that excites you, whether I'm part of it or not." The generosity of that statement, his willingness to prioritize my well-being over his own desires, crystallized something I'd been feeling but hadn't fully articulated, even to myself. "I want you to be part of it," I said simply. "The distance is challenging, but what we're building feels worth that challenge." His smile in response was both tender and relieved, as if he'd been harboring doubts I hadn't recognized. "I feel the same way." Dinner was at a small French bistro, intimate without being overtly romantic, a space where we could continue our conversation without the pressure of excessive formality. Over excellent food and wine, we navigated toward the question that had been hovering unspoken between us. What exactly were we building, and how would we sustain it across the distance between Chicago and Seattle? "I've been thinking about practical considerations," James said as we shared a dark chocolate tart for dessert. "I can work remotely at least 1 week a month, and there are direct flights several times daily." And I'll have some flexibility once I'm past the initial probation period, I added. Plus holidays, though. I hesitated, the prospect of holiday travel raising the complicated question of family gatherings. James understood immediately. Navigating family events will be complex, he acknowledged. Ryan is still struggling with our relationship, though he's making efforts to accept it. And my family situation is, I searched for the right word, unresolved. We don't have to solve everything tonight, James said gently. Some of these challenges will clarify with time. The practical, methodical approach to our relationship was refreshingly adult after the drama of the past months. There was no desperate clinging, no ultimatums, just two people who valued each other trying to build something meaningful despite complicated circumstances. That night, standing outside my apartment building after dinner, the question of physical intimacy hung between us. We had shared that aspect of our relationship in Seattle, but the revelations about my initial motives and the subsequent distance had created a reset of sorts. Now we were navigating the transition from the intensity of our beginning to something more measured and intentional. Would you like to come up? I asked, suddenly feeling uncharacteristically shy. James's smile was warm but restrained. Are you sure? There's no rush, Mia. I'm sure, I said, finding certainty in the moment. Not because I feel obligated or because it's expected, but because I want to be close to you. Upstairs, my apartment reflected the careful curation of my new life. Artwork I'd collected over the years arranged thoughtfully on walls, books organized on shelves, furniture chosen for comfort rather than showcase. It was more fully realized than the temporary space I'd occupied in Seattle after leaving Ryan, a physical manifestation of my commitment to building something authentic. James moved through the space with appreciation, noting the details that expressed my aesthetic sensibilities. This feels like you, he said, examining a small sculpture I'd purchased from a local artist. Thoughtfully assembled, with an eye for both beauty and meaning. The observation, seeing me so clearly in my choices, moved me unexpectedly. I crossed to where he stood and kissed him, a deliberate gesture that bridged the careful distance we'd maintained since his arrival. He responded with equal intention, his hands framing my face with a gentleness that contrasted with the growing intensity between us. What followed was different from our previous encounters, slower, more exploratory, as if we were discovering each other anew with the honesty we'd established as our foundation. Each touch, each response felt like a conversation rather than a performance, building toward an intimacy that transcended the physical. Afterward, lying in the quiet darkness of my bedroom, James traced patterns on my bare shoulder. I've missed this, he said softly. Not just this, he gestured between our bodies, but the connection it represents. Me too, I admitted, realizing the truth of it as I spoke. In Seattle, there was always this shadow hanging over us, my original motives, the secret I was keeping. Now it feels cleaner, he supplied when I hesitated. More authentic. Exactly. I nestled closer, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It's strange to think that something that began with such questionable intentions could evolve into this. People are complex, James replied, his voice thoughtful in the darkness. Relationships even more so. Sometimes the path matters less than where it leads. The philosophical observation was quintessentially James, finding meaning in complexity rather than seeking simplistic explanations. It was one of the qualities that had first drawn me to him, even when my motivations were muddied by revenge. The weekend passed in a pleasant blur of exploration, both of the city and of our evolving relationship. We visited the Art Institute, comparing perspectives on the collections. We walked along the lakefront, bundled against the brisk autumn wind. We cooked dinner in my apartment, the domestic activity feeling both novel and natural. On his last evening, as we sat on my small balcony watching the city lights come alive, James brought up the topic I'd been avoiding. Have you decided whether to respond to Vanessa's email? I sighed, wrapping my sweater more tightly around me against the cooling night air. I've drafted about a dozen responses and deleted them all. Nothing seems right. What's the barrier? He asked, not pushing but gently probing. I considered the question carefully. I think I'm afraid that responding opens a door I'm not ready to walk through. That it creates expectations for reconciliation when I'm still figuring out how I feel. That's valid, James said. But consider this, a response doesn't have to be a resolution. It can be an acknowledgement without being an absolution. The distinction resonated with me. You mean I can acknowledge her apology without necessarily offering forgiveness? Exactly. You can say, I hear you, I'm processing, I need time, without committing to any particular outcome. I nodded slowly, seeing the wisdom in his suggestion. I'll think about it. The next morning, as I prepared to see James off to the airport, he handed me a small flat package wrapped in simple brown paper. What's this? I asked, surprised. Just a small something to commemorate your new beginning, he said. Open it later, when you have time to appreciate it properly. We said goodbye with a lingering kiss and promises to finalize plans for my visit to Seattle in a month's time. Watching his taxi pull away, I felt a complicated mixture of emotions: sadness at his departure, but confidence in our connection, the distance between us geographical rather than emotional. Back in my apartment, I unwrapped his gift carefully. Inside was a small, exquisite painting, a study in oils of a lake at dawn, mist rising from the water, light breaking through clouds. It was unquestionably Lake Washington, viewed from a perspective I recognized as the vista from James's home. The artist's signature in the corner read C. Whitaker. A note accompanied the painting, written in James's precise hand. Catherine painted this the summer before she became ill. She believed that dawn over water represented possibility, the day not yet defined, the light still discovering its path. It seems fitting for your new chapter. With admiration and affection, James. I sat with the painting in my lap, overcome by the significance of the gift. This wasn't just any artwork. It was a piece created by James's late wife, something deeply personal that connected his past to our present. The generosity of sharing this piece of his history with me spoke volumes about how he viewed our relationship. That evening, I hung the small painting in my bedroom where the morning light would catch it first, a daily reminder of possibility and connection. Then I sat down at my computer and opened Vanessa's email again. After reading it through once more, I began typing a response. Vanessa, thank you for your email. I appreciate your acknowledgement of the hurt your actions caused and the absence of excuses or justifications. I'm not ready to offer forgiveness or to attempt reconstructing our relationship. The betrayal was profound, and trust, once broken that completely, isn't easily rebuilt. I need more time to process everything that happened and to focus on building my new life here in Chicago. That said, I hear the sincerity in your apology, and I recognize the courage it took to reach out without expecting anything in return. I hope you're finding your own path forward, wherever that may lead. Mia, I read it over carefully, ensuring it conveyed exactly what I felt: acknowledgement without promises, honesty without cruelty. Then I clicked send before I could second-guess myself. The weeks following James's visit established a pattern for our long-distance relationship. We spoke daily, shared aspects of our separate lives through photos and stories, and planned for the times we could be together physically. It wasn't ideal, but it felt sustainable, a deliberate choice we were both making because the connection was worth the effort. My work at the Brennan Gallery consumed much of my energy in a positive way. Eliza had given me increasing responsibility, impressed by my eye for emerging talent and my ability to create cohesive exhibitions from diverse works. I was developing a reputation among local artists as a curator who took risks on unconventional work while maintaining the gallery's standards of excellence. The Nguyen installation has generated significant interest, Eliza informed me one afternoon as we reviewed visitor comments. Your instinct to position it as the centerpiece was spot on. Coming from Eliza, who was sparing with praise, this was high commendation. I felt a surge of professional satisfaction that had nothing to do with Ryan, Vanessa, or the past I'd left in Seattle. This was entirely my own achievement, built on my expertise and passion. We should consider a focused exhibition of immersive installations for the spring schedule, I suggested, emboldened by her approval. There are several Chicago artists working in that medium who haven't had proper showcasing. Eliza considered me thoughtfully. Draft a proposal, she said finally. If it's as well conceived as your work on the current exhibition, I'll consider it. That evening, I shared the news with James during our call, my excitement bubbling over as I described the opportunity to develop my own exhibition concept. That's wonderful, Mia, he said, his pride evident even through the phone. I never doubted you'd impress them with your talents. It's still just a proposal at this stage, I cautioned, not wanting to get ahead of myself. But the fact that Eliza is willing to consider it is huge. When do you visit next month? I want to take you to dinner with Philip Chen, James said, referring to a friend of his who owned galleries in several cities. He's been looking to expand his Chicago presence, and someone with your eye would be a valuable connection." The offer was typical of James, genuinely supportive of my career without being controlling or assuming I needed his assistance. He viewed his connections and resources as tools he could offer, not leverage to exert influence. "I'd appreciate that," I replied, "though I'm committed to the Brennan for the foreseeable future." "Of course," he agreed immediately. "It's never too early to build professional relationships, that's all." Philip is an interesting person regardless of potential opportunities. The contrast with Ryan's approach to my career couldn't have been more stark. Ryan had always treated my work at the gallery as a quaint hobby, something to indulge until we married and started a family. James saw it as central to my identity, a pursuit worth nurturing and respecting. As October turned to November, I found myself settling more deeply into Chicago life. I'd made friends among my colleagues and neighbors, developed favorite restaurants and coffee shops, established routines that made the city feel like home. The sharp pain of betrayal that had defined my last months in Seattle had faded to a dull ache that surfaced only occasionally, usually triggered by family calls or holidays approaching. My mother continued her campaign for reconciliation with increasing urgency as Thanksgiving drew near. "Your father and I aren't getting any younger," she said during one particularly pointed call. "Is this really how you want things to be if something happened to one of us?" "That's emotional blackmail, Mom," I replied, trying to keep my voice level, "and it's not fair." "What's not fair is having my daughters at war with each other," she countered. "Vanessa made a terrible mistake, but she's trying to make amends." "How long are you going to punish her?" "This isn't about punishment," I tried to explain for what felt like the 100th time. "It's about needing space to heal from a profound betrayal. Vanessa didn't just date a man I had history with, she deliberately betrayed my trust with my partner of 4 years. People make mistakes, Mia. Holding grudges only hurts you in the end." The conversation circled without resolution, as these calls always did. My mother saw the situation through the lens of family harmony. I saw it through the lens of personal boundaries and necessary healing. Neither perspective was likely to shift through these strained exchanges. After hanging up, I found myself staring at Vanessa's email and my response, rereading the exchange for clues about how to navigate the upcoming holiday. I hadn't heard back from her after my message, a silence that could be interpreted as respect for my need for space or as hurt at my unwillingness to offer immediate forgiveness. On impulse, I texted Lisa, who had remained a supportive friend despite the distance. Thanksgiving family drama looming. Mom pushing hard for reconciliation with V. Not ready but feeling guilty. Thoughts? Her response came quickly. "Your timeline, not theirs. If you're not ready, don't force it." Guilt is the weapon of choice for family manipulation. Resist. The straightforward support made me smile. Lisa had always been good at cutting through emotional clutter to the heart of a matter. "What are your Thanksgiving plans?" I texted back. "Friendsgiving at my place. You're welcome to join virtually if family dinner becomes unbearable. We're starting the wine at noon, so expect incoherence by dessert." I laughed out loud at the image. "Might take you up on that. James is coming to Chicago for the weekend after, so at least I have that to look forward to." "Ooh, Silver Fox holiday visit." Things still going well there? Surprisingly well, considering the distance and the complicated history. I paused, trying to find the right words. "He's good for me. Respectful of my independence, but supportive when I need it. Sounds like you found a grown-up relationship. Those are rare, hold on to it." Lisa's observation resonated with me long after our text exchange ended. A grown-up relationship that described perfectly what James and I were building, based on mutual respect and clear communication, with room for individual growth alongside connection. It was what I'd thought I had with Ryan before discovering the reality of his immaturity and selfishness. As Thanksgiving approached, I made the difficult decision to remain in Chicago rather than flying back to Seattle for the family gathering. It wasn't just about avoiding Vanessa. It was about claiming the right to establish my own traditions, to define family in ways that supported rather than drained me. I called my father to explain my decision, knowing he would be disappointed but more likely than my mother to respect my choice without emotional manipulation. "I understand, sweetheart," he said after I'd outlined my reasoning. "Your mother won't be happy, but she'll come around." "I'll call on Thanksgiving Day," I promised. "And I'm planning to come for a few days at Christmas, though I'll probably stay with Lisa rather than at the house." "One step at a time," my father said, his quiet support a balm to my guilt. "We'll be here when you're ready, however that looks." Instead of the traditional family Thanksgiving, I accepted an invitation from Danny, my neighbor, to join a gathering of what she called holiday orphans, friends and acquaintances who couldn't or chose not to travel home for the holiday. It turned out to be exactly what I needed: relaxed, laughing people sharing food and stories without the weight of complicated history. "So what's the story with the silver fox who visited last month?" Danny asked as we helped clean up after dinner, the other guests having moved to the living room for games and more wine. "Forgive the neighborly nosiness, but he seemed pretty smitten with you." I smiled, realizing I hadn't shared much about James with my new friends. "It's complicated," I admitted. "He's actually the father of my ex-boyfriend." Danny's eyebrows shot up. "Okay, that's not the answer I was expecting. There has to be a story there." "A long one," I confirmed. "The abbreviated version is, ex cheated with my sister. I initially pursued his dad as revenge, but then it evolved into something genuine. Now we're trying to see if what we've built can survive the distance and the complicated history." "Damn, girl." Danny shook her head in amazement. "That's either the plot of a really good novel or a really bad Lifetime movie, depending on how it ends." I laughed, surprised by how much lighter it felt to frame my situation with humor rather than gravitas. "I'm hoping for the novel ending, not the Lifetime one." "Based on the way he looked at you when you were leaving for dinner that weekend, I'd bet on the happy ending," Danny said, handing me a plate to dry. "That man is all in." The casual observation from someone who had witnessed just a brief interaction between James and me was strangely reassuring. Our connection was visible to others, tangible in a way that validated my own feelings. True to my word, I called my parents on Thanksgiving Day. The conversation was brief but civil, with my mother making only one pointed reference to Vanessa missing me at the table. I deflected gracefully and focused on hearing about my father's latest woodworking project, a safer topic that allowed us to connect without tension. What I hadn't expected was the text from Vanessa that arrived later that evening. "I respect your decision not to come home for Thanksgiving. I just wanted you to know I'm thinking of you today and missing you. No pressure for a response. Love, V." The simple message, free from guilt-tripping or passive-aggressive undertones, caught me off guard. It seemed to reflect the more mature Vanessa glimpsed in her email, someone capable of respecting boundaries while still expressing genuine feelings. After consideration, I sent a brief reply. "Thank you for understanding. Hope the day was good for you." It wasn't much, but it was a small opening, an acknowledgement that perhaps eventually some form of relationship might be possible, even if it would never be what it once was. James arrived in Chicago the day after Thanksgiving, looking slightly tired from the early flight but brightening visibly when he spotted me waiting at the airport. We'd agreed he would stay at my apartment this visit, a step toward greater intimacy in our evolving relationship. "How was your alternative Thanksgiving?" he asked as we drove from the airport, his hand resting comfortably on mine. I told him about Danny's gathering, the diverse group of holiday orphans, the surprisingly moving moment when we'd each shared something we were grateful for this year. "What did you share?" James asked, curious. "New beginnings," I said simply. "The chance to redefine myself beyond what happened in Seattle." He nodded, understanding the significance. "That's what I'm grateful for as well, though I'd add meeting you to my list, regardless of the complicated circumstances." The weekend unfolded with comfortable familiarity punctuated by new discoveries. I showed James more of my Chicago life, my favorite bookstore with its resident cat who had taken a liking to me, the small theater where I'd attended an independent film festival, the lakefront path where I ran on weekend mornings. On Saturday evening, we attended a gallery opening for a friend of Eliza's, the first time we'd appeared as a couple in my professional circle. I was mildly anxious about how we would be perceived. The age difference was noticeable, though not remarkable in the art world, but my concerns proved unfounded. James charmed my colleagues with his genuine interest in their work and perspectives, never overshadowing me or attempting to leverage his own connections inappropriately. "Your James is delightful," Eliza commented as we were leaving, her approval evident despite her characteristically restrained delivery. Knowledgeable without being pretentious, a rare combination in gallery circles. "He is pretty special," I agreed, pleased by her assessment. Later that night, as we lay together in the quiet darkness of my bedroom, James broached a subject we'd been circling but not directly addressing: the future. "I've been thinking about practical arrangements," he began, his voice thoughtful in the darkness. The commuting between Seattle and Chicago is sustainable for now, but long-term, we might want to consider alternatives. My heart quickened. What kind of alternatives? Several possibilities, he said, his analytical mind evident in the careful structure of his thoughts. I could transition more of my business to remote work, allowing for longer stays in Chicago. You might eventually find opportunities that bring you back to the Pacific Northwest, though I'd never want to interfere with your career trajectory. He paused, his fingers tracing patterns on my arm. Or in time, we might consider a third location that represents a fresh start for both of us. The measured consideration of options, presented without pressure or expectation of immediate decisions, was quintessentially James. He was thinking ahead without demanding commitments, exploring possibilities while respecting my independence. I'm open to considering all of those, I said, appreciating his approach. Right now, I'm committed to the Brennan for at least the next year or two. I want to establish myself here, develop my curatorial voice. Absolutely, he agreed immediately. I'm not suggesting any immediate changes, just opening the conversation about how we might eventually bridge the geographical gap. I turned to face him in the darkness, studying the now familiar contours of his face. Thank you for thinking about this so carefully, I said. For not making it an ultimatum or putting your needs above mine. That's not what partnerships are about, he replied simply. At least not healthy ones. The word partnership resonated. It described precisely what we were building, a connection based on mutual respect and consideration rather than dependency or power imbalance. As December arrived, bringing with it Chicago's distinctive winter atmosphere, frigid winds off the lake, festive lights transforming Michigan Avenue, the peculiar hush of the first heavy snowfall, I found myself settling into a rhythm that balanced work, my relationship with James, and gradual healing from the betrayal that had set everything in motion. The exhibition proposal I'd submitted to Eliza had been approved with minimal revisions, giving me the green light to curate my first solo show for the spring schedule. I threw myself into the project, contacting artists, developing the thematic framework, considering spatial arrangements that would create dialogue between diverse works. You've got a good eye for connections, Eliza observed during one of our planning sessions. These pieces shouldn't work together on paper, but you've found the thread that unites them. The professional validation fueled my confidence, reinforcing that I'd made the right decision in accepting the Chicago position. I was growing in ways that wouldn't have been possible had I remained in Seattle, trapped in the gravitational pull of betrayal and revenge. My communications with Vanessa remained minimal but civil, occasional texts about neutral topics, brief updates shared through my father during our weekly calls. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a deliberate stepping back from active estrangement, creating space for whatever might eventually develop. Ryan had fallen silent after our unexpected conversation at the gallery in Seattle, a relief, as I had no desire to maintain connection with him. Through James, I learned that he had started seeing someone new, a colleague from his firm. The information registered as a distant fact rather than an emotional trigger, evidence of how far I'd moved from the pain of his betrayal. As the holidays approached, I prepared for a brief, carefully structured visit to Seattle, 3 days between Christmas and New Year's, staying with Lisa rather than my parents to maintain some emotional buffer. James and I had coordinated our schedules so that we'd have time together before and after my family obligations, creating a supportive framework for what would inevitably be a challenging visit. "Are you nervous about seeing Vanessa?" James asked during our call the night before my flight to Seattle. "It's okay if you are. Nervous isn't quite right," I reflected, trying to identify the complex emotions swirling within me. Apprehensive maybe, cautious. I've done a lot of healing these past months, but being in the same room with her will be a test of that progress. "You don't have to have all the answers or know exactly how you'll feel," he reminded me gently. "Just be present with whatever emerges without judgment." His wisdom, delivered without platitudes or oversimplification, was exactly what I needed to hear. "When did you get so emotionally intelligent?" I teased, trying to lighten the mood. "Painful experience," he replied, a hint of rueful humor in his voice. "Losing Catherine taught me that emotions don't follow logical patterns or convenient timelines. They just are, and fighting them usually makes things worse." The reference to his late wife reminded me of the painting hanging in my bedroom, dawn over Lake Washington, possibility emerging from darkness. It had become a touchstone during my months in Chicago, a visual reminder that beauty could follow pain, that new beginnings were possible even after profound loss. Seattle greeted me with familiar gray skies and gentle rain, so different from Chicago's dramatic winter, but comforting in its predictability. Lisa met me at the airport, enveloping me in a fierce hug that communicated everything words couldn't. "I'm proud of you. I've missed you. I'm here for whatever you need." "You look good," she said, studying me at arm's length. "Chicago agrees with you." "It's growing on me," I agreed as we headed to her car, "though I miss certain things about Seattle." "Like Silver Fox Whitaker?" she teased, nudging me with her elbow. "Among other things," I laughed. "He sends his regards, by the way. You two really hit it off when he was helping me move." "He's good people," Lisa said, her tone turning more serious. "I was skeptical at first, given how things started, but seeing you together that day, it's the real deal, isn't it?" "It is," I confirmed, the simple acknowledgement warming me despite the damp chill. Unexpected but genuine. Lisa's apartment was decorated for the holidays with her characteristic exuberance, lights strung everywhere, a tree laden with eclectic ornaments, scented candles creating a spicy, welcoming atmosphere. She'd prepared the pull-out couch with fluffy pillows and the quilt my grandmother had made years ago, a touch of home that brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "I thought you might want that," she said softly, noticing my reaction. "A piece of family tradition without the family complications." "It's perfect," I managed, grateful for her thoughtfulness. We spent the evening catching up properly, beyond what we'd shared in texts and calls, talking about her job, my new life in Chicago, the challenges and triumphs of the past months. It felt restorative, reconnecting with the person who had supported me through the darkest period after discovering Ryan and Vanessa's betrayal. The following day, Christmas Eve, brought the first real test of my emotional healing. My parents were hosting their annual open house, a tradition that included extended family, neighbors, and friends dropping in throughout the afternoon and evening. It would be impossible to avoid Vanessa in that setting, but the constant flow of people would provide buffers against extended interaction. Lisa accompanied me, her steady presence beside me as we approached the familiar house where I'd grown up. Through the windows, I could see the Christmas tree in its usual spot, the same decorations that had marked the holiday season throughout my childhood. The sight brought a pang of nostalgia tinged with sadness for the innocence lost, the family harmony shattered by betrayal. "Ready?" Lisa asked, squeezing my hand. "As I'll ever be," I replied, taking a deep breath before opening the door. The house was already bustling with activity, neighbors chatting in the living room, cousins helping in the kitchen, holiday music creating a festive backdrop. My mother spotted me first, her face lighting with genuine joy as she hurried to embrace me. "You're here," she said, holding me tightly. "I've missed you so much." Despite the tension of recent months, the familiar scent of her perfume and the warmth of her hug triggered a wave of emotion I hadn't anticipated. Whatever disagreements we'd had about how to handle the situation with Vanessa, this was still my mother, and I had missed her. "Missed you too, Mom," I said, returning the embrace before gently disengaging. My father appeared next, his quiet greeting and firm hug communicating his understanding of the complex emotions this visit entailed. "Good to have you home even briefly," he said simply. I circulated through the gathering, reconnecting with extended family and family friends, fielding questions about Chicago and my new job with practiced responses that revealed enough to satisfy curiosity without inviting deeper probing. Lisa remained nearby, a constant reassuring presence as I navigated the social currents. It was nearly an hour before I encountered Vanessa. She was in the dining room, arranging a platter of holiday cookies, when our eyes met across the table. The moment suspended between us, charged with months of silence and the weight of betrayal. She looked different somehow, thinner, her face more drawn, her characteristic vivacity dimmed. For a fleeting moment, I felt an echo of the protective instinct I'd always had toward my younger sister, quickly suppressed by the memory of her betrayal. "Hi," she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. "It's good to see you." "Hi," I replied, maintaining emotional neutrality. "How have you been?" It was the most basic of social exchanges, yet it felt monumental. The first direct conversation since the discovery that had shattered our relationship. "Managing?" she answered with unexpected honesty. "Work is good. Other things are..." She hesitated. "Still finding my way." The absence of Ryan in her response was notable. I wondered briefly if James knew more about their status than he had shared with me, then dismissed the thought. It didn't matter. Their relationship was no longer my concern. "Chicago is treating you well?" she asked, genuine interest in her voice. "It is," I confirmed. "The gallery position is challenging in the best ways. The change of scene has been good for me." A cousin entered the dining room then, breaking the moment with enthusiastic greetings and questions about my life in Chicago. I answered automatically, grateful for the interruption that prevented the conversation with Vanessa from venturing into more difficult territory. Throughout the evening, we orbited each other carefully, present in the same gatherings but never alone together, exchanging pleasantries when circumstances required, but avoiding deeper engagement. It wasn't reconciliation, but it wasn't open hostility either. A careful neutrality that acknowledged both the familial connection and the breach of trust that had damaged it. As the open house wound down and guests departed, I found myself helping with cleanup in the kitchen, while my mother packed leftovers for Lisa and me to take back to her apartment. Vanessa entered with the last of the glasses from the living room, placing them carefully in the sink where I was washing dishes. "I can finish these if you want to rest," she offered. "You must be tired from traveling." The simple gesture, offering to take over a chore, struck me with its normalcy, an echo of countless shared tasks throughout our childhood and young adulthood. For a moment, I glimpsed the sister I had loved unquestioningly before betrayal had rewritten our relationship. "I'm okay," I said, not unkindly. "But thanks." She nodded, accepting the boundary without pushing. "Mia," she began, then hesitated. "I just want you to know, I understand why you needed to leave Seattle, to create distance. And I respect the space you've needed." The acknowledgement, delivered without expectation or demand, surprised me with its maturity. "I appreciate that," I said carefully. "It's been necessary for my healing." "I know," she replied simply. "I hope someday we might find a way back to some kind of relationship, but I understand that's your decision, not mine." The conversation was interrupted by my mother returning to the kitchen, but the brief exchange left me thoughtful. Vanessa seemed to have done genuine reflection during our months apart, developing an understanding of boundaries and consequences that had previously been foreign to her character. Later that night, back at Lisa's apartment, I called James to share the experience of the day. It was strange, I admitted as I described the careful dance of distance and civility with Vanessa, like we were following a script for estranged sisters attempting normal family holiday without anyone actually writing the lines. "How did it feel seeing her?" James asked, his voice warm through the phone connection. "Less overwhelming than I expected," I reflected. There was a moment, just a flash really, when I felt a shadow of our old connection. But mostly it was just, I searched for the right word. Muted. Like watching a film of a relationship rather than experiencing it directly. "That sounds like progress," he observed. "Not in terms of reconciliation necessarily, but in emotional healing. The ability to be present without being overwhelmed by the feelings of betrayal." "It is progress," I agreed. "I'm not sure what it means for our relationship long term, but it felt like I was seeing her clearly, not through the lens of childhood patterns or the fog of recent pain. That clarity is valuable regardless of what you decide about future connection," James said. "And speaking of future connections, I can't wait to see you tomorrow. I've missed you." The simple statement warmed me, a reminder that whatever family complications remained unresolved, I had built something new and meaningful with James, a relationship founded on mutual respect and genuine caring, despite its complicated beginnings. The following day, Christmas proper, was spent with my parents and Vanessa in a subdued gathering that balanced family tradition with the reality of strained relationships. We exchanged gifts, shared the traditional Christmas breakfast, and maintained conversations at a safe level of depth, weather, work, neutral memories of holidays past. Throughout the day, I found myself observing my sister with new eyes, noticing changes that spoke to her own journey over the past months. She was quieter, less inclined to dominate conversations or seek attention. When she spoke, her comments were more thoughtful, less reactive. Whatever consequences she had faced from her choices with Ryan, they appeared to have prompted genuine reflection and growth. By evening, when I prepared to leave for my planned dinner with James, I felt a curious mixture of emotions. Sadness for what had been lost between Vanessa and me, cautious hope for what might eventually be rebuilt, and most surprisingly, a measure of gratitude for the painful journey that had led me to Chicago and to a more authentic understanding of myself. "Will we see you again before you return to Chicago?" my mother asked as I gathered my things. "I'm not sure," I answered honestly. "I have plans with James for the next couple of days, and I'm meeting friends for New Year's Eve. But I'll try to stop by before I fly out." My mother nodded, disappointment visible but restrained. "We understand," she said, making a visible effort to respect my boundaries. "We're just glad you came at all." The acknowledgement of my autonomy, however reluctant, represented progress in our relationship as well. My mother was learning, albeit slowly, that manipulating me with guilt was no longer an effective strategy. Vanessa walked me to the door while my parents remained in the living room, a deliberate choice that created a moment of privacy between us. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "I know it wasn't easy." "It was important," I replied, "for me as well as for Mom and Dad." She nodded, understanding the distinction, that my visit had been for our parents' benefit and for my own healing, not necessarily a step toward reconciliation with her. "Mia," she began, her voice hesitant, "I know you're building a new life in Chicago, and I respect that completely. But if you ever decide you're open to talking, really talking, about everything that happened, I'm here. No pressure, no timeline. Just an open door, whenever or if ever you choose to walk through it." The offer, made without expectation or demand, touched something in me I hadn't expected to feel. "I'll remember that," I said, not committing to anything but acknowledging the possibility. As I walked to my rental car, I realized that the visit, while emotionally complex, had accomplished something important. It had demonstrated that I could engage with my family, including Vanessa, without being pulled back into patterns of hurt and betrayal. I could maintain boundaries while still participating in family connections. It was a delicate balance, but one that felt sustainable as I continued building my new life. James was waiting at his hotel when I arrived, his warm embrace providing a sense of safety and understanding after the emotional complexity of the day with my family. We had dinner reservations at a quiet restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay, a place known for excellent food, but, more importantly, for private tables where conversation wouldn't be overheard. "How was the family Christmas?" he asked once we were settled with wine and appetizers. I gave him a fuller account than I had been able to provide on the phone the previous night, the careful navigation of sensitive topics, the subtle changes I'd observed in Vanessa, my mother's gradual, if reluctant, acceptance of my boundaries. "It sounds like significant progress for everyone involved," James observed. "Not reconciliation in the traditional sense, but movement toward healthier interactions." "That's exactly it," I agreed, appreciating his ability to frame the situation so precisely. "I don't know if Vanessa and I will ever rebuild anything resembling our previous relationship, but today felt like at least we might eventually establish something honest, even if it's more limited." "And how are you feeling about that possibility?" I considered the question carefully. "Open to it, I think, though not rushing toward it. There's a part of me that will always love her as my sister, despite everything. But trust is a different matter entirely, and I'm not sure that can ever be fully restored." James nodded, understanding the distinction. Trust, once fundamentally broken, is rarely reconstructed exactly as it was. If it returns at all, it's usually in a different form, with new awareness built into its foundation. The observation carried subtle resonance for our own relationship, trust that had been damaged by my initial deception, but was being carefully rebuilt through consistent honesty and respect. It was different from what might have developed had we begun with complete transparency, but it was perhaps stronger for having been tested and deliberately reconstructed. As dessert arrived, James shifted the conversation toward our future plans. "I've been exploring remote work options more seriously," he said. "There's a possibility I could arrange to spend 2 weeks of each month in Chicago by spring, maybe more by summer." The prospect of seeing each other more regularly, of building a life together across the geographical distance, filled me with unexpected joy. "That would be wonderful," I replied. "The past months have confirmed what I suspected. What we're building is worth the effort of navigating the distance." "I agree completely," James said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "Which brings me to something I've been wanting to discuss." The serious note in his voice sent a flutter of nervous anticipation through me. "What is it?" "I'm not proposing marriage or asking you to move back to Seattle," he clarified quickly, correctly reading my momentary anxiety. "We're still finding our way, and I respect your need to establish yourself in Chicago. He paused, considering his words carefully. "But I am proposing a commitment to intentionally building our future together, whatever form that eventually takes. To making decisions with us in mind, not just as individuals. To creating a partnership that honors both our individual paths and our connection." The thoughtfully articulated commitment, neither rushing toward conventional milestones nor avoiding definition altogether, embodied everything I had come to value about James. He offered clarity without constraint, commitment without control. "I want that too," I said, squeezing his hand. "A partnership that respects who we are individually while building something meaningful together." The conversation might have seemed anticlimactic to an observer. No dramatic proposal, no life-altering decisions. But to me, it represented something profound. A deliberate choice to build a relationship based on mutual respect and honest communication, acknowledging the complexities of our beginning while committing to a future defined by our own terms rather than conventional expectations. The remaining days of my Seattle visit passed in a blend of time with James, reunions with old friends, and careful navigation of family dynamics. I had one more brief interaction with Vanessa during a final visit to my parents' home, a conversation about her work that remained safely in neutral territory but contained moments of genuine connection over shared interests. Ryan remained conspicuously absent from both conversation and physical presence, a silence that spoke volumes about how completely our lives had diverged. Whatever path he was following now, it no longer intersected with mine in any meaningful way. As I prepared to board my flight back to Chicago, James accompanying me to the security checkpoint, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. From the devastating moment of discovering betrayal, through the dark period of plotting revenge, to the unexpected development of genuine connection with James and the building of a new life in Chicago, it had been a path I could never have anticipated or chosen, yet one that had led to authentic growth and possibility. "Call when you land," James said, kissing me goodbye at the security line. "I'll be in Chicago in 3 weeks." "I will," I promised. "And James, thank you for being part of this journey, complicated as it's been." "The complications are part of our story," he replied with a smile. "Not what defines it, but what gave it depth and texture." As I settled into my seat on the plane, Chicago-bound with a clearer sense of purpose and possibility than I'd had in months, I thought about the painting of dawn over Lake Washington hanging in my bedroom, light breaking through darkness, the day not yet defined but full of potential. It seemed an apt metaphor for where I found myself, emerging from the shadow of betrayal into a future I was actively choosing rather than merely reacting to. The revenge I had once sought so methodically had transformed into something entirely different, not the satisfaction of causing equal pain, but the freedom of creating a life defined by my own values rather than by reaction to others' actions. In seeking to hurt Ryan through James, I had instead found my way to an authentic connection that honored the best in both of us. As the plane lifted off, Seattle receding beneath clouds tinged pink with sunset, I felt a sense of completion, not of the entire journey, which would continue evolving, but of this particular chapter. The betrayal that had once consumed my every thought and action had been relegated to its proper place. A painful experience that had shaped but no longer defined me, a catalyst for change rather than the sum of my story. Chicago awaited with its vibrant art scene, my growing professional reputation, the apartment that had become a true home, and the promise of James's increased presence in the months ahead. Whatever challenges remained, navigating family relationships, maintaining connection across distance, building trust where deception had once lived, they were challenges I now faced with clear eyes and an open heart, confident in my ability to create meaning from even the most painful experiences. The revenge I had planned had failed spectacularly, transforming instead into redemption I hadn't sought, but had somehow found along the way. It wasn't the ending I had initially imagined, but it was infinitely more satisfying than any vengeance could have been. A life reclaimed, authentic connections established, and the freedom to write my own story going forward, defined not by betrayal, but by the choices I made in its aftermath.